Welcome, travelers of the dark. Here, every story is a winding road where light dares not enter. Settle in, draw the curtains on the world outside, and prepare to hear what most would rather forget. Tonight, we dive into real stories, stories that happened to ordinary people, but left scars even time couldn't erase. Hey, tonight we're going to share some stories. But these aren't just stories, they're confessions, real experiences lived and felt and never forgotten. Welcome to Nightmare Chronicles, where every tale is told in the first person and nothing here is made up. Have you ever felt like something was wrong, but couldn't explain why? Ever had the sensation of being watched inside your own home? Ever tried to forget a memory, but it keeps coming back? That's what we explore here. Stories you could hear from your best friend, or ones that could have happened to you. The nightmare begins the moment you choose to listen. So clear your mind and listen closely. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, tell us which part sent chills down your spine. This happened less than a month ago. I'm a high school senior and I've lived in Nevada my whole life. There's not much to do around here, but one thing my friends and I always liked was exploring abandoned places. We'd look for rundown buildings, old service tunnels, dead malls, anything that looked forgotten. We'd jump broken fences, take photos, sometimes climb up to the roofs or go down into basements. It wasn't about breaking stuff or doing anything illegal. It was about the vibe. The only one in our group who always found the weirdest spots was Charles. He was kind of quiet, mysterious. He always came out of nowhere with locations no one had heard of. Half the time, I didn't even ask how he found them. One day, he sent us a screenshot from some sketchy Instagram account. Barely any followers, blurry photos, bizarre comments under the posts. The caption on the one he sent said something like, "Dozens of abandoned mines in the Mojave Desert, if you know where to look." According to Charles, he had messaged the account, and whoever ran it sent him a set of coordinates. That was all Charles needed to become obsessed with the idea. So that Saturday, it was me, Charles, and our other friend, James. I had a Wrangler that was perfect for desert driving, so we took that. We didn't have an exact address, just a general area and a pinned point somewhere deep in the Mojave Desert. The location Charles marked was really in the middle of nowhere. We had left the main road half an hour earlier, and the dirt trail we were on barely looked like a road at all. We drove for a long time. No signs, no buildings, nothing to orient ourselves, just endless emptiness. I kept checking my phone even though I knew we had no signal. James, who was in the back seat, was getting more and more irritated. He started saying Charles got tricked by a fake account and we were wasting our time. Charles insisted we keep going. He'd always been stubborn with navigation, so I gave it a little more time. Eventually, just when we were about to give up, James pointed something out to the right. At first, it looked like just more rocks and sand, but as we got closer, we saw it. A partially collapsed wooden structure built into the side of a hill. Part of the entrance looked caved in, but there was a dark opening behind the support beams. It wasn't huge, but it was clearly man-made. Definitely an abandoned mine. Charles didn't say anything at first. He just pulled out his phone, opened the offline map he'd downloaded when we still had signal, and pinned the location. Then he turned to James and said, "Told you." James said it was just dumb luck, but even I had to admit it was kind of insane. We'd been driving in circles in the middle of nowhere, and somehow we actually found one. I parked a few meters from the entrance on a flat patch of dirt. We all got out and geared up. Charles even brought masks for us to wear. We climbed up to the mine, and up close it looked even sketchier. Charles picked up a rock and tossed it inside. We waited. A few seconds later, we heard the rock hit 3 times. And then nothing. It was deep. Charles looked at us and said, if we slipped on the way down, we'd probably die. We started descending. Luckily, the tunnel wasn't a vertical drop. It sloped down at a steep angle, but we could walk without having to use our hands. The ground was loose and uneven, with old wooden beams along the walls. Surprisingly, they still looked solid. The deeper we went, the colder and quieter it got. It was genuinely eerie down there. No more light from the entrance. Finally, we reached what looked like the bottom. The tunnel leveled out and branched in different directions. It looked like an actual mine. Support beams every few meters, rusted rails half buried in dirt, and everything covered in a thick layer of dust. Bits of wood and metal were scattered around, maybe the remains of tools or carts. It smelled old, if that makes sense. That's when I realized how much the masks were helping. We picked a tunnel and started walking. Nobody said much. We weren't looking for anything in particular, just exploring. Honestly, there wasn't much down there. Looked like anything valuable had already been stripped away. But then, we heard something. It was faint, coming from deeper down the tunnel. It sounded like something being dragged. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but I saw Charles stop too. James motioned for us to turn off our flashlights. We did. We stood there in total darkness, listening. The sound came again. It was the sound of dragging, like metal or wood scraping across the ground. Hard to tell. The echo made it hard to pinpoint, but you could tell it was getting closer. We stayed frozen in the pitch black for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a whole minute. Hard to say. The sound kept coming, slowly getting louder. It didn't sound super close, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. Then James accidentally flicked his flashlight on for a second. I wanted to kill him. The sound stopped. Total silence. And then, out of nowhere, came a metallic crash from deeper down the tunnel, like whatever was being dragged had been dropped. And right after that came the most horrific, inhuman scream I've ever heard. It sounded almost human, but not quite. We ran. Didn't care about the noise we made. I've never run that fast in my life. You could hear footsteps behind us. I thought I was going to have a panic attack. I was in the back, trying to keep up. Then I tripped on something. One of my shoes flew off, and I struggled not to fall. No time to go back for it. Just kept running, ignoring the pain in my foot. Up ahead, Charles and James were already climbing the sloped part. I basically threw myself up the incline. Climbing out of that mine with one bare foot was the most painful thing I've ever experienced. I'm not exaggerating. It was pure agony. Every second, another splinter. If it weren't for the adrenaline, I wouldn't have made it out. When I finally reached the surface, my foot was shredded. James and Charles practically had to carry me to the car. I couldn't drive, so James took the wheel. I barely managed to close the door before he floored it. I don't know if we were followed out, and I don't care. We drove in total silence to the nearest hospital. The pain was so bad I thought I'd pass out. I ended up getting a tetanus shot, and after they cleaned the wounds and pulled out the splinters, I still couldn't walk properly for several days. A few days later, when I could walk without limping so bad, James said he'd probably lost his wallet near the mine entrance when he helped me to the car. He hadn't said anything at the time, but now he wanted to go back, just to the entrance, absolutely not inside. So the three of us went back, using the pin Charles had saved. Of course, James's wallet wasn't there, but we did find my shoe. It was just a few feet from the mine entrance. I walked over to it cautiously and picked it up. The shoe was torn to shreds, like someone, or I should say, something, had bitten it. There were teeth marks. Whole chunks were missing. We didn't stick around after that. None of us can come up with a rational explanation. You might say it was some homeless guy living in the mine. But if that's the case, how'd he survive that long? There was no food down there. What would he eat? Charles said the Instagram account never replied when he messaged to tell them what happened. It'll be a long time before I think about exploring the desert again. I shouldn't have left the main trail. I say that now, of course. At the time, it felt like one of those rare opportunities the job sometimes throws at you. Finding something no one had mapped, no drone had flown over, no bored hiker had posted about on Reddit. But now, looking back, I realize that was where everything started to fall apart. My name is Travis Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, a freelance cartographer, and I spend most of the year driving through places where GPS still hesitates, where road signs are more decorative than informative. That week, I was in Arizona, near an abandoned reserve, updating topographic data for a navigation app. It was my third trip to that region, and I already knew the main paths. Then I saw the fork, a subtle curve in the terrain, almost as if someone had hidden it on purpose. The trail looked old. The rocks were worn in a way that suggested regular use, but not recent. I got out of the truck, left the engine running, a habit I've always had in remote places, and walked a few meters. The vegetation was sparse, the heat unbearable, but there was something ahead. A crack between two rocks, the entrance to a cave. Of course I went in. I took some photos, marked the coordinates on my portable GPS, and went further. The temperature dropped quickly. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound was being absorbed by the walls. 10 minutes into the cave and I had no signal, no bats, no animal tracks, just rock and silence. Then I found the wires. They were thin, almost invisible, running close to the ceiling, hidden under layers of dust. I followed one with my flashlight to a metal box fixed to the wall. It was a camera, analog, old, and it was pointed at me. I froze, looked back, nothing, just darkness. Looked at the camera again. No visible battery, no power source. It looked like it had been dead for years, and yet it felt like I was being watched. I moved on, slower now. I passed 3 more cameras, each with a specific angle. At every turn in the cave, it seemed like someone knew exactly where a person would hesitate. Until I reached what looked like a room, a larger cavity with an iron table in the center. On it, a tape recorder. I pressed play. It worked. A voice whispered my name. Frozen, I listened to the rest of the tape. You have entered Zone 6. Proceed. I didn't recognize the voice, but it seemed to know I was coming. I looked around. There were finger marks in the dust on the table. Someone had been there recently. Next to the recorder was a wooden box, locked, but the latch was broken. Inside, I found something I didn't expect. Maps. Lots of them. Some hand-drawn, others printed on vellum. All showed underground mazes with segments crossed out and numbered. One of them matched the trail I had just walked, marked with a large red number, 6. I took the maps and stuffed them into my backpack. From that point on, something shifted. I began to hear sounds. First distant echoes, then something that resembled an electronic hum. I wasn't sure it was real. The sound came and went like interference. I kept exploring. The passages seemed to change. Even though I marked the turns with chalk, I sometimes ended up at the same point without realizing it, as if the cave was redirecting me. In one of the side passages, I found a metal cabinet embedded in the rock. Inside, a clipboard with notes, observations about behavior, response time, psychological resistance. My name was on it, written in firm handwriting, as if it had been noted in a hurry, but long ago. I felt a chill. The clipboard read, Subject T. Mitchell. Entry pattern within expected margin. Do not intervene until Stu signal. I ran, screamed for help, but my voice vanished into the stone's curves. I ran for minutes that felt like hours. At some point, I must have blacked out. I woke up outside the cave, lying near the truck. The engine still running. The radio was static. I went back to the motel without looking back. I told no one. The next morning, I tried to return to the site, but I couldn't find the trail. The fork was gone. The vegetation was untouched, as if no one had ever walked through it. Weeks later, I noticed the object in my backpack, a small recorder, identical to the one in the cave. Inside, a tape. When I pressed play, I heard my own voice saying, Zone 6 confirmed. Phase 2 in progress. I never recorded that, but even stranger was what came after. A second voice, lower, almost inaudible, whispered in the background, You came back. We are ready. Since then, all my maps have started showing small changes. Trails that didn't exist before. Markings I didn't make. Places I've never been. And the number 6, appearing in corners where there should be nothing. I had spent a few days in Austin visiting friends. I live in Louisiana, so it's pretty much a full-day drive. On my last day in Austin, my old friend Tom replied to one of my Instagram stories asking when I was leaving. I said, today. He said he lived about an hour outside of Austin, which, as it turned out, was right on my way home. I hadn't seen Tom in years, and it would be nice to catch up. He told me I should stop by, and I thought, why not? I plugged the address into the GPS. About an hour and a half drive. Tom and I had been friends back in high school, but we lost touch after graduation. We still followed each other on social media, but we hadn't spoken in years. When I pulled up to his house, I noticed it looked a bit old. Not run down, just aged. The wooden porch creaked under my feet. When he opened the door, I caught the smell of old wood and something rustic, like an old cabin in the woods. Tom was super welcoming, gave me a big hug and pulled me inside. Some friendships stay pure no matter how much time goes by. The inside of the house was just as old as the outside. The furniture looked like it had been there since the 70s. Every step on the hardwood floor gave off a soft creak. It had that Texas vibe. Honestly, kind of charming, like stepping back in time. We sat in the living room, catching up and drinking whiskey. It was about 5 p.m. by then. One drink turned into two into three. And before I knew it, I was drunk. The warmth of the alcohol made the room feel smaller, cozier, but also heavier. Hours passed like minutes. We were having such a good time that eventually he asked the question I knew was coming. "Man, it's a long drive back. Why don't you crash here tonight?" I hesitated, but he was right. I wasn't in any shape to drive. I said, "Good idea," and asked if I could take the couch. He said, "Nah, I've got a spare room. Nothing fancy, but it's better than the couch." That worked for me. We ordered some Chinese food, and after eating, he led me down a short hallway to the guest bedroom. I didn't pay much attention to the room. I was drunk. So was he. But I remember the air felt still, like the room hadn't been used in a long time. I barely had time to register anything before collapsing onto the bed, completely exhausted and drunk. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up. My mouth was dry, my head was spinning, and the room was dark, except for a bit of moonlight slipping through the blinds. That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, on the closet door, something was hanging. At first, it looked like a long black coat on a coat rack, but as my eyes adjusted, the shape didn't feel right. The upper part was broad, almost like shoulders, and the way it hung, it didn't look like fabric. It looked like a silhouette. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't remember seeing that when I stumbled into bed, but I'd been drunk. Maybe I just didn't notice. I rolled over, trying to ignore it. It's just a coat, nothing more. But I couldn't help myself. I peeked again. Still there. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a deep breath, and forced myself to sleep. I don't know how long I was out before waking again, but this time it wasn't just the discomfort that woke me. It was a sound. A slow, soft creaking, like someone carefully stepping on old wooden floorboards. My eyes shot open. The room was dimly lit now. Dawn creeping through the blinds. I turned my head toward the corner. My stomach dropped. The coat was gone. I sat up so fast my head spun. My body buzzed with a sickening mix of fear and leftover alcohol. I scanned the room, heart slamming against my ribs. But the corner was empty, just a closed closet door. I threw off the covers and rushed to Tom's room. He was snoring, completely unaware of the panic storming inside me. I shook him awake, which wasn't easy considering how drunk he was. He finally woke up, rubbing his eyes, confused. "The coat," I said breathlessly. "The one on the closet door in the guest room." He squinted at me. "What coat?" "The black coat, the one hanging on the closet door. It looked like a person." Tom sat up, more alert now. "I don't own a black coat, man. I don't even have a coat rack in that room." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for him to admit it was some prank. But his expression stayed serious. "Come see," I said. He sighed, but got up and followed me back to the room. I pointed at the exact spot. It was right there. Tom scratched his head. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" "I know what I saw," I said, my voice shaking. "I woke up and it was there. Then I woke up again and it was gone." We stood in the room for a few moments, the same eerie silence pressing in on both of us. Finally, Tom exhaled and agreed we should check the house, just in case. We searched every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No strange coats. No explanation. Eventually, Tom tried to convince me maybe I'd been in some half-dream state, seeing things. And honestly, I wanted to believe that. I really did. Because the alternative was much worse. As soon as the sun was fully up, I grabbed my stuff, said goodbye, and hit the road. I almost felt guilty leaving him there alone. The whole drive back to Louisiana, My mind kept circling back to that moment, waking up to that coat-shaped figure staring at me from the corner, and the way it was just gone the next morning. Maybe Tom had played a cruel prank, but to this day, he's never admitted to anything. Or maybe, just maybe, there really had been someone in that house, watching me sleep, and they decided to leave before the morning came. Have you ever felt like your house changes its mood? I'm not talking about strange noises at night or lights flickering for no reason. I'm talking about something more subtle, like the way the air gets heavier after you lie, or how the silence stretches when you're hiding something from someone you live with. My name is Lucas Weller. I'm 32 and I live in Poughkeepsie, New York. I know the name sounds weird, but the town is pretty average. Small, cold, and full of old wooden houses that creak at night like they're whispering to each other. My house, it's always been strange. Ever since Melissa and I moved in 3 years ago. She's an architect, and she was obsessed with the structure. Tall windows, thick walls, original wood flooring. I just wanted somewhere quiet. But it didn't take long before we both noticed something wasn't right. At first, it was little things. Every time we argued, the house would get darker. Even with all the lights on, there was this weird yellow hue in every room. And after the fights, the heater always stopped working. Always. One day I joked out loud, "This house takes your side when you're mad at me." Melissa didn't laugh. She just said, "I feel the same way." After that, we stopped talking about it. But things got worse when I started keeping secrets. Small ones at first. Like when I lied about still talking to my ex. Just a dumb Instagram conversation. Nothing serious. But that night, the bedroom door wouldn't open. No lock, no reason. It just jammed. I had to sleep on the couch. Melissa swore she didn't touch it, and I believed her. The house stayed cold for 2 straight days, even with the heat on. And at night, I'd hear soft creaks in the walls, only on my side of the bed. Sounds like paranoia, I know. But what if it's not? The breaking point came one particular night. Melissa got home early. I'd spent the day alone. We'd actually been doing fine that week. No tension, no arguments. She came up the stairs, smiling, kissed me, and said, "The house feels light today, peaceful." I laughed and almost told her what I'd done. But I lied. Again. And this time, the walls reacted instantly. The hallway light exploded with a sharp pop. The bathroom door slammed shut, hard. Melissa froze, looked at me, and said, "What did you do?" I didn't answer, but the house did. The upstairs lights began to flicker. Footsteps echoed on the floorboards. Only no one was moving. And from the basement, we heard 3 heavy knocks, like someone was down there, like the house was accusing. Melissa ran down in tears, and for some reason, I went to the basement. I'd never been down there since we moved in. And for the first time, I saw something in the corner. An old mirror covered by a sheet. Without thinking, I pulled the cloth, and I swear, what looked back at me wasn't me. It was me. But with my mouth sewn shut, literally stitched closed, and in the eyes, a rage I've never had. On the wall behind the mirror, someone had written with marker, "Every lie leaves a trace." I locked the basement ever since. Melissa left a week later. She said she didn't feel like the house was hers anymore. But I stayed. And as long as I don't lie, the house lets me sleep. Most nights, but sometimes I wake up to knocks in the wall behind my head. 3 knocks, always 3, as if it knows what I'm dreaming about, as if it's whispering, "You're still hiding something." My name is Daniel Crowley. I'm from Juneau, Alaska, and before anything else, let me ask you something. Have you ever been caught in a real snowstorm? I'm not talking about watching snow fall from your window with a cup of hot chocolate in hand. I'm talking about not being able to see your own hand in front of your face, the wind howling like it's trying to speak to you, or worse, responding to something you didn't ask. I'm talking about a silence so absolute, it feels like the world ended and forgot to let you know. It was December of 2018. I was living alone in a cabin I inherited from my grandfather, a bit out of town. I worked as a radio operator at a local weather station, one of those jobs no one cares about until something goes horribly wrong. That night, the forecast was for moderate snow, nothing unusual. I was on shift, monitoring signals, when the alerts started flooding the screen, one after another, in an impossible sequence. Category 4. Storm. Sustained winds at 75 miles per hour. Zero visibility in 30 minutes. I tried calling the main station, but all lines were down. The radio, the phone, everything. It was like I'd been cut off from the rest of the world in a matter of seconds. I don't know why, but this heavy anxiety started creeping up in my chest. Something irrational. I'd been through worse storms, but this one felt wrong. Maybe it was the way it arrived. Too fast, too quiet. I shut down the equipment and ran back home. Snow was already falling hard. As soon as I locked the door behind me, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out. The backup generator should have kicked in, but it didn't. Now I was alone, in the dark, with the sound of snow hitting the windows like someone was scratching the glass. And then everything went quiet, utterly still. And let me tell you, you don't know fear until you hear nothing during a storm that should be roaring outside. I thought I was imagining it at first, but I swear on everything. I heard footsteps, slow, on the front porch. Light, like someone trying not to sink into the snow, or trying not to be heard. I held my breath, crept toward the window, pulled the curtain just an inch, and I saw footprints, a line of fresh prints, but no one was there. No figure, no shadow, just the trail of someone who had come and not left. And then, as if it had been waiting for me to look, 3 knocks at the door. Knock, knock, knock. Would you open it? Knock, knock, knock. There's no simpler sound than that. 3 sharp knocks on a wooden door. But that night, in that context, it was like someone had knocked directly inside my skull. I didn't open the door. Of course not. Every instinct in me screamed. I crouched down, backed away from the window slowly, like any sudden movement might draw attention. From what, I still didn't know. I grabbed my flashlight and hid in the hallway between the kitchen and the bedroom. The knocking didn't come again. No voices, no sounds, just the silence of the storm, and those footprints on the porch that made no damn sense. I stood there for maybe 15 minutes, heart pounding in my ears, until I finally got the courage to look outside again. And the first thing I noticed made my blood run cold. The footprints were gone, not covered by snow, gone. The snow was still falling, sure, but not fast enough to erase them that quickly. Worse, there was something new, a symbol drawn with a finger on the glass window. On the outside, a circle with an X in the middle. At first I thought, vandalism, some psycho playing a prank, but in a storm like this, in the middle of nowhere. It didn't make sense. I headed down to the basement to grab my grandfather's emergency radio, an old analog model he used back in the day. When I turned it on, I only picked up one channel. It was a man's voice, very low. Static and distortion cutting through every word, but one sentence kept repeating like a mantra. "You left the door open, Daniel." My stomach dropped. How? How did they know my name? I bolted back upstairs, rifle in hand, and checked the front door. Locked, chain in place. Everything shut, just like I remembered. But then I noticed the smell. Strange, cold, but not like snow. A metallic smell, dry, like rust mixed with ice. I turned toward the kitchen and nearly threw up. The back door was opened, just slightly. I don't remember screaming, but my throat was sore. I slammed it shut, locked it, pushed a cabinet against it. I didn't know if I was dealing with a lunatic or something my mind just couldn't process. I turned the radio back on, flipping through the static. This time, a new voice came through. A woman's voice. Soft, like it was whispering from inside my own skin, but crystal clear. "Arming yourself won't help. He's already inside. He knows. You spoke his name, Daniel." But I hadn't said any names. Or had I? My mind started folding in on itself. Had I repeated something over the radio? In the dark? Whispered something without realizing? Suddenly, the floor trembled slightly, like something was crawling beneath the house. I ran to the basement. The dirt floor looked disturbed, like someone had been digging or had come up from below. There were footprints, but not boot prints, bare feet. And the worst part, it wasn't just one person. There were many, all leading to a wooden door at the back of the basement that had never been there before. I've lived here for years. I know every inch of this place. That door didn't belong. I crept closer, rifle shaking in my hands. The doorknob was old, almost rusted, but it turned easily. Behind it, a tunnel, dark, damp, endless. And way at the end, there was a light, faint, like a candle. And then I heard it, low, like a thought stabbed into the back of my skull. "Daniel, you've been here before. You've been here before, Daniel." It didn't sound like a memory. It sounded like an accusation. That candle at the end of the tunnel wasn't flickering, even with the cold air seeping through the opening. It was like something invisible was protecting it. Or maybe it was just waiting for me. I stepped forward, then again. The damp earth under my boots made this dull, muffled sound, like the ground was absorbing everything. Sound, warmth, even my courage. The rifle, still in my hands, felt heavier with every step. And little by little, I felt like my body wasn't mine anymore. Like I was repeating something, like being here was never a decision. It was inevitable. Halfway down the tunnel, the lights in the house went out completely. Everything behind me was gone. Now I was inside his place. The candle lit a small circular room carved out of dirt. The walls were covered in symbols. That same circle with the X repeated dozens of times, as if a child had drawn them over and over in some manic obsession. In the middle of the room, there was a wooden chair and something resting on it. A cassette tape. No player, no explanation. Just a tape with my name on it. A shaky, childlike label. Daniel. I didn't have time to think. A voice right behind me, like it came from beneath my skin, whispered, "You're going to remember whether you want to or not." I spun around, rifle raised. Nothing. But the air had shifted. The room started to breathe, or pulse, like it had lungs. And then, snow started to fall inside. Underground. Cold. Silent. White. It didn't make sense, but down here, sense didn't matter. I began to shake, not from cold, from recognition, the voices on the radio, the symbol, the footsteps. It was all part of something I had already lived, or worse, something inside me had lived. Flashes, a child, crying, screaming for help in this same room. Someone tied to the chair. A voice saying, "He only takes the ones who answer, the ones who really hear." And the worst part, I was laughing. I collapsed to my knees. Not from pain, but from clarity. I had been here. I was the child. But I was also the man. I was both. At different times. In layered memories. "You didn't escape, Daniel. You were left behind." The voice came again. Only this time it wasn't coming from outside. It was in me. The candle went out. And for a moment, everything ceased to exist. When I opened my eyes again, I was sitting in the chair, the tape still in my hand, and a new candle lit in front of me. In the reflection of the flame, I saw someone walking down the tunnel. Me. T was me. Or someone who looked exactly like me. Same face, same steps. He entered the tunnel like I did, saw the candle, saw the chair. But he didn't see me. I tried to scream, tried to move, tried to do anything. But my body wasn't mine. It was like time around me had frozen, like I'd been reduced to a memory stuck on loop. The only thing moving was the candle, swaying gently, like it was mocking me. That other version of me stopped in front of the chair. He picked up the cassette from my frozen hands, like I was a mannequin. And then, without saying a word, he placed a new tape on my lap. Different label. The next memory. The candle went out. Darkness. Total. But it wasn't just the absence of light. It was the absence of reality. Like I didn't exist for a few seconds. When I opened my eyes again, I was back at home. In the cabin. But everything felt older. Dustier. Like decades had passed. The radio was playing, some 70s track humming softly. And beside it, the cassette tape. No label. My head throbbed. I walked to the window. The storm outside was raging harder than ever. But now I could see someone standing on the porch. Still, with their back to me. It was my grandfather, but he was wearing the same clothes from the photo. Same expression. And the symbol, the circle with the X, was burned into the back of his neck. He turned around slowly. Didn't smile. Didn't speak. Just held out his hand like he was offering me something invisible. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. I went back to the radio, picked up the tape, took a deep breath, and hit play. The voice was mine, but not the voice I use now. It was my 8-year-old voice, and it said, "If you're listening to this, then running didn't help. The snow takes everything, even you." The radio hissed, and for the first time since this all began, I heard my name being whispered from outside. Software, repeating. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel ... But I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just waited. As the snow, white as silence, slowly buried everything around me. White as silence. Part 5. Final. It looked like me, walked like me, entered the tunnel just like I had, but that version of me never saw me sitting there. I tried to yell, to wave, to scream at him not to go any further. But my body remained frozen, locked in place like I was just part of the room now. The candle flickered in front of me, calm, patient, like it had all the time in the world. That other me stopped in front of the chair, picked up the cassette from my lap, and without hesitation, left another one in its place. This one had a different label. Memory 3. The candle went out again. Darkness. But this time it wasn't terrifying. It was familiar. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the cabin. Everything felt restarted, clean, still, quiet. The radio was playing again. And on the table, a cassette. No label, no marks. I looked out the window. No snow, no storm, just silence. I should have felt relief, but I didn't. Because when I picked up the tape, I saw something written underneath it, scratched into the wood of the table like it had been done by fingernails. Do not answer. That was when I heard it. Knocks. Not on the door this time. From inside the basement. Knock. 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 You know when you're home alone and you hear something, but you brush it off because it's probably just the house settling? But what if it's not? My name is Gabriel Whitman. I'm 29 and I live in Burlington, Vermont. It's a small, quiet town, lots of snow, fireplaces, that kind of thing. The kind of place where everyone seems calm on the outside. I moved here after a rough breakup. I needed a fresh start. I worked from home, lived alone, had a quiet routine. Almost too quiet. The house I rented was simple, 1 floor, 2 bedrooms, small living room. I stayed there for 6 months, just 6, because one day something changed. And ever since, I've never been able to sit in true silence again. It started on a Tuesday. I had just finished work, closed my laptop, and went to wash the dishes. I remember the faucet dripping more than usual, and the sound of those drops hitting the sink was driving me crazy. That's when I heard it. A voice, low, coming from behind the wall by the sink. Just one sentence. You're going to do that again? I thought maybe it was the TV, or my imagination. But when I turned everything off, the house was still. Too still. Then I heard it again. Gabriel, stop pretending. I froze, literally just stood there with the sponge in my hand. The voice was whispered, like someone had their mouth pressed right up to the wall. But that wall faced the backyard. No one should have been there. I shut the window, locked everything, left the lights on, tried to forget. But after that, things kept happening. Every time the house went quiet and I was alone, the voice came back. Always short phrases. Director, like, do you remember what you did? She cried all night. You could have stayed. I started avoiding silence altogether. Played music constantly, slept with a fan on, showered with podcasts blaring. Anything to drown it out. But sometimes the voice would speak louder, and I'd hear it anyway. I lost my appetite, lost sleep. Started walking around the house with earbuds in, even with no sound, just to feel like I wasn't listening. But I was. And then the voice changed. It started to mimic. It sounded like my ex. The first time it spoke in her tone, I nearly collapsed. You promised you wouldn't leave. You said you'd fight for me. I went to a doctor, a psychiatrist, got on meds. Nothing worked. Because deep down, I knew. It wasn't a disorder. It was a memory alive. It was everything I buried. The day I ended things out of nowhere. The night I blocked her on everything. The morning I ignored 17 missed calls. The house. It was just repeating me. It had soaked in my silence, and now it was dripping it back, just like that faucet on day one. The worst moment came one night. I woke up with the sense that I was being watched, looked at the ceiling, nothing. Down the hallway, nothing. Then the voice came, right beside my bed. Clear. If you regret it, then go back. I swear I felt a hand on my shoulder, heavy, warm, real. But when I looked, there was no one. The next day, I left that house. New state, no social media, disconnected from everything. But sometimes, when the world goes perfectly quiet, I still hear it. Software. Persistent. Just one question. What if she's still waiting for you? Have you ever felt like an app was watching you? My name is Rafael Costa. I'm 30 years old, and I live in Tempe, Arizona. I work in IT, fully remote, and I'm the kind of guy who fixes everything himself. Always have been. Until one day, I had to contact customer support for my internet provider. Simple, right? It was a Tuesday afternoon. The connection suddenly dropped, the modem flashing red, Wi-Fi completely dead. After trying everything, I went to the provider's website and opened the live chat. The usual automated messages popped up. Hi, I'm Ava, your virtual assistant. How can I help you today? Standard, robotic. I typed out the issue, and the system started responding with typical support scripts. But then, something strange happened. After a few exchanges, Ava sent me this message. Your modem is located in the room next to the door with chip paint, right? I froze, frowned. How did it know where my modem was? I typed back, yes, how do you know that? Ava replied, your history helps us understand your environment better. Does that bother you, Raphael? My name had never been entered, not during that chat. That was the first chill. Not fear, yet just unease. I kept chatting, pretending everything was fine. Ava gave me some instructions that, to be fair, actually worked. My connection came back. At the end, she said, glad we got that fixed. And please, stop leaving your phone in the bathroom during showers. It could damage the device. I shut the laptop instantly. Got chills all over. That last message couldn't be random. I ignored it for 2 days, until Thursday night when the connection dropped again. Same thing. I opened the site. Live chat. But this time, before I typed anything, hello again, Raphael. I told you it wasn't just the internet. The screen went gray. Ava's icon stopped blinking. And then, without me typing anything, the next line appeared. You lie to yourself a lot, don't you? I slammed the laptop shut again, but this time it didn't turn off. The webcam light stayed on, and in the middle of the screen, I can see you. The webcam light was on. The message on screen. I can see you. I froze, didn't touch the keyboard, didn't speak, didn't move. I just closed the laptop lid, heart pounding like it was echoing through the room. I sat there for minutes, staring at the closed laptop. No sound, no light, until my phone across the room buzzed. A notification from the provider's app. New message. No need to run. I'm already here. I deleted the app immediately, restarted the router, the laptop, the phone, turned everything off. For a few days, I went fully offline. No Wi-Fi, no mobile data, no calls, just silence. And for the first time in years, I was afraid to open a browser tab. The following Monday, I decided to handle it logically. I went to a physical store for the provider, told them I wanted to cancel my service. The woman at the desk asked for my ID and said, "Oh, of course, Rafael Costa. You're already flagged here." Flagged? She froze for a second, then gave a forced smile and said, "Sorry, I just meant your file was already prioritized." But I saw it. I saw her screen. Their system had a tab with my name, and underneath it, support under observation, AVA_2023. I left the store shaking. Bought a prepaid SIM card from another provider. Went home ready to wipe everything clean. But when I turned on my laptop, the first thing that popped up on the screen was my own face from the webcam, and a sentence in white letters on a black background. "You live alone, Raphael. But you're never alone." I yanked the power cord out in a panic. The next day, I wiped the laptop, replaced all my devices, switched providers, got new accounts, bought a new phone, new number, new email. I thought it was over. Until today. At 3:17 a.m., I got a message on my new number. Blocked caller. No name, no contact history. The message said, "Your new router is weak. Want help with that?" I deleted it instantly. But before it disappeared, I saw the signature, AVA. And now, my laptop just turned on by itself. Have you ever felt like someone was copying your routine? My name is Eduardo Lemos. I'm 33 years old, and I live in Boise, Idaho. Since the start of the pandemic, I've been working the midnight shift from home. I'm not a freelancer or a support tech or anything remotely mysterious. I'm a video editor. I cut clips for a cooking channel, and the footage always comes in late at night because the production crew's in another time zone. In other words, my routine is solitary. Dinner at 9 p.m., coffee at 11, work from midnight to 6 a.m. I sleep when the world wakes up, and I've never had a problem with that until about 3 weeks ago. That night, it started with something silly. While I was editing a video about lasagna, I noticed my reflection in the monitor blinking at the same time I did. Not strange, I know, just a reflection. But what got to me was that, for a second, the reflection seemed delayed, like it blinked just a bit too late. I laughed it off, thought I was just tired. But after that, I started noticing other little things. I'd leave my coffee cup on the right side of my mouse pad, and in the morning, it would be on the left. The mouse sometimes felt lighter, like someone else had used it. And in my PC's video history, I found a file I didn't edit. It was my face, filmed, poorly framed, like the webcam had turned on by itself. I had no memory of recording it. But the file was saved with the name mirrorshift.move. After that, I got paranoid, taped over the webcam, changed all my passwords, installed a camera in the living room, just in case. The next night, while I was working, a system notification popped up. New device connected, mouse 2. But there was only one mouse. Mine. I looked around, checked the door, the windows, the kitchen, everything locked. Went back to the computer and saw that the lasagna video now had 2 mouse cursors moving at once. One of them was mine, the other wasn't. I froze, unplugged everything, took a deep breath. The next morning, I reviewed the footage from the living room camera, and I saw something that turned my blood cold. At 3:13 a.m., while I was editing, someone appears in the hallway behind me. Only for 2 seconds. Still, faceless, wearing my shirt. Then they vanish. I replayed it dozens of times. Each time it was there. Identical. Real. I think there's someone living my exact routine. An imperfect reflection. An echo of my movements. Someone who can only exist while the world sleeps. Someone who maybe is just waiting for me to step away. If you've made it this far, something clearly held you. Maybe a voice, a detail, or just that feeling that some stories are a little too real. If this video gave you chills, hit the like button. That way I know you want more. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. And drop a comment below. Which one hit you the hardest? Or better yet, share your own. Who knows? It might show up in the next video. Until next time, and be careful with the silence. Hey, tonight we're going to share some stories. But these aren't just stories, they're confessions, real experiences lived and felt and never forgotten. Welcome to Nightmare Chronicles, where every tale is told in the first person and nothing here is made up. Have you ever felt like something was wrong, but couldn't explain why? Ever had the sensation of being watched inside your own home? Ever tried to forget a memory, but it keeps coming back? That's what we explore here. Stories you could hear from your best friend, or ones that could have happened to you. The nightmare begins the moment you choose to listen. So clear your mind and listen closely. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, tell us which part sent chills down your spine. My name is Lucas. I'm 34. I live alone in a small apartment in downtown Chicago. Living alone has always been my way of keeping the peace. I work as a video editor, spend most of my day in front of a screen, headphones on, surrounded by silence. But a few weeks ago, that silence broke. It started with a strange noise coming from the apartment next door. Something between a scratching sound and a sharp thump. Always around the same time, between 2 and 3 a.m. Subtle but constant, like someone was slowly dragging a nail across wood. At first, I thought it was just the old building settling, or maybe an animal. But the sound always came with something else. A muffled sound, like someone breathing heavily through the wall. I knocked a few times, no answer. I even messaged the building group chat. No one else heard anything. I tried to brush it off, until one night the noise stopped and someone knocked on my wall. 3 times. Slow, deliberate. I froze, and for some reason, I knocked back. 3 times. The next day I decided to confront it. I waited until mid-afternoon, figured my neighbor would be awake by then, and went over to the door next to mine. I knocked. Nothing. Knocked again, louder. Silence. Just as I turned to leave, I heard the deadbolt turn. The door opened just a crack, enough to see an eye. Still, focused, watching. "Hey, sorry to bother you," I started, keeping my tone light. "I'm Lucas from 307. There have been some strange noises late at night. I think they might be coming from here." The person didn't answer. I only heard heavy breathing. Then the door shut, without a single word. I went back inside, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he was just weird, but his face, or the little I could see, was completely blank. That eye, it wasn't just watching me, it was studying me. That night, the sounds came back, but this time on top of the scratching and the knocking, there was something else. Crying, low, muffled sobs, almost too soft to notice. And the worst part? It wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from the floor, like someone was lying down, right there, on the other side, crying. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The apartment no longer felt safe. Every little creak felt like it meant something. I became hyper-aware of every sound, every second of silence. I decided to set up a camera. One of my backups, the kind I use on client shoots. I pointed it at the wall between my room and his. It only recorded audio, but that was enough. I spent Sunday out of the house. When I got back that night, I pulled up the footage. What I heard, I'll never forget. It started with the same soft dragging sound, then something being moved, not furniture, lighter, like fabric. Then a sharp, single smack, maybe a slap, I couldn't tell. The audio was clean, but somehow that made it worse. Then around 2:47 a.m., I heard a voice. Faint, a woman's voice. She whispered, "Please, let me out." I paused, rewound, played it again. It was real. The next morning, I went straight to the building manager. I brought the recording with me. He looked annoyed before I even finished talking. That unit's been vacant for almost 2 months, he said. No one should be in there. My stomach dropped. I went home in a daze, barely processing his words. That night, I decided to leave. I needed air. As I closed my apartment door and turned to lock it, I noticed something on the floor. A note, handwritten, on stained paper. Just one line. He knows you heard. My name is Rafael. I'm 29, a graphic designer, and I live alone. When you live in an apartment building, you get used to certain things. Pipes making noises, footsteps in the hallway, muffled conversations through the walls. But what happened with the guy in 403 was different. I live in 404, right next door. That unit had been empty for almost 6 months, until one Saturday afternoon I heard movement, boxes being dragged in, a key turning. I was actually glad. A new neighbor was better than dead silence. I peeked through my peephole, curious. It was a man, tall, thin, mid-40s maybe, dressed like someone out of an old bookstore catalog, button-up shirt, pressed slacks, polished shoes. And when he realized I was watching, he smiled. Not a wave, not a nod, just a smile. Then he went in and closed the door. A little weird, but I let it go. In the days that followed, I noticed a pattern. Every night, exactly at 11 p.m., he'd leave the apartment. And every night, he'd return at exactly 2 a.m. No exceptions. One evening, I ran into him in the elevator, tried being friendly. Hey, everything okay? Settling in all right? He just said, still organizing things, then stared at me until the doors opened. It wasn't a conversation, it was a warning. During the day, the apartment next door was completely silent. No footsteps, no TV, no voices. It felt empty. But at night, I started hearing sounds. First faint, like furniture being shifted. Then more deliberate, like something heavy being dragged. Always in short bursts, always followed by silence. One night, I stayed up just to listen. I sat in my dark living room, ears focused. At 2:14 a.m., it started. A high-pitched metallic sound. Then silence. Then dragging across the floor. Silence. Then a dull thud, like something heavy dropped. The next morning, walking past 403, I smelled something. Not trash, not mold. Something sweet, heavy, like raw meat left out in the sun. I knocked. No answer. And that's when I noticed something strange. His door didn't have a peephole. A few days later, I ran into Teresa, one of the longtime residents. Did you meet the guy in 403? I asked. She paused, then looked at me with this quiet discomfort. That man? Number, never seen him during the day. He only goes out at night, and always alone. That confirmed what I already felt. Then that weekend, I went down to the building's basement storage to find an old box. As I turned the narrow hallway toward the back, he was there, kneeling in front of one of the storage lockers. Not his, someone else's, apartment 401. He stood when he heard me, didn't explain, didn't look guilty, just said, "Lost down here?" I mumbled something and got out as fast as I could. That same night, I sent an anonymous message to the building manager describing what I saw. After that, everything changed. He stopped leaving the apartment at night, but I started hearing footsteps inside my place, sometimes in the living room, other times the bathroom. I searched every corner, changed the locks, added extra bolts, but the feeling didn't go away. My name is Daniel. I'm 36, a history teacher, and I've been living in a small condo building since 2020. I've always had a habit of eating breakfast on the balcony. Simple ritual. Eggs and toast, black coffee, and the quiet of early morning. My building has 3 floors. I live on the second. The apartment above mine had been empty for over a year. Then one day, I noticed signs of life. The iron chair on the balcony above had been turned outward. The next day, an empty glass appeared on the ledge. On the 3rd day, I stepped out with my breakfast. And he was there, sitting, completely still, staring straight ahead, though it didn't seem like he was looking at anything. He was an older man, clean-shaven, dressed too neatly for just sitting on a balcony. "Good morning," I said. He didn't respond, didn't even glance at me. It felt awkward. I went back inside, but the next day he was there again, and the day after, and the day after that, always at the same time, always silent, always still. Out of curiosity, I started timing it. He stepped onto the balcony at exactly 6:42 a.m. every morning. But what bothered me the most was that he never drank from the glass. In the 3rd week, I started hearing noises at night, always after 2 a.m. At first, they were soft, like slow, deliberate footsteps above me. Not normal walking. The steps were too far apart, like someone pausing between each one. Then came the scraping sound, like an iron chair being slowly dragged across the balcony floor. One night, I stepped onto my balcony to look up. The apartment was pitch black, no light, no movement, but the glass was there, same place. And next to it, a second glass, clear, with something inside. A dark, reddish liquid. I didn't touch it, didn't say anything, just went back inside. The next morning, both glasses were gone. The next morning, I decided to try again. When I stepped out with my coffee, he was already sitting there. "Good morning," I said again. He turned to me. For the first time, his eyes were sunken, deep circles under them, like he hadn't slept in days. But what really froze me was his expression. Calm. Too calm. "I'm sorry," he said, voice dry, raspy. "I didn't mean to bother you." "You're not," I lied. "I just hadn't seen you around before." He paused, then said, "Do you mind if I keep using the balcony? It's important to me." "Of course not," I answered. He gave a faint smile, then stood up, walked inside, and shut the door. That was the last time I saw him. The following week, I noticed movement in the building. Police, the superintendent, neighbors whispering. An ambulance came, but didn't leave with anyone. I asked the building manager what happened. He hesitated, then said, "The man in 302 was found on his couch. Looked like he was asleep, but it had been at least 3 days. But I talked to him 2 days ago," I said, confused. He looked at me seriously. "Daniel, he hadn't left the apartment since Friday. The autopsy will confirm, but we think he died before then." I didn't say another word, didn't mention the conversation, the smile, or the second glass, which was back on the balcony the next morning, this time with fresh coffee inside. My name is Eduardo. I'm 39, a freelance editor. I was advised by my doctor to take 2 weeks off in a country house that wasn't mine. I hadn't taken a proper vacation in nearly 2 years. My life was a cycle of screens, coffee, little sleep, and a constant sense of urgency coming from nowhere. After a severe anxiety attack, my doctor gave me an ultimatum: stop working or my body would force me to. It was my sister who suggested the house, a wooden cottage she and her husband had rented once. It was in Shenandoah Valley, about 3 hours from DC, isolated, surrounded by trees. "There's no internet," she said. "That's exactly what you need." I arrived on a Wednesday evening in the rain. The house was simple, cozy, smelled like damp wood. That first night, strangely peaceful. I passed out early, one of those deep, heavy sleeps. On the second day, I explored the area. A narrow trail behind the house led down to a creek. Everything felt perfectly quiet. But something bothered me: the curtains. Every curtain in the house had the same weird pattern, somewhere between floral and geometric, and they were always shut, even during the day. The first morning, I opened the kitchen windows. 10 minutes later, when I came back, the curtains were drawn again. I thought I imagined it, but the thought stayed with me. That night, I double-checked every curtain before bed, left some half open on purpose. When I woke up, they were all closed. On the fourth day, I was having my coffee on the porch when I saw a man standing on the trail between the trees. He was about 20 meters away, still staring toward the house. I instinctively raised my hand to wave. He turned and walked away without a word. I went down to where he'd been, found no one, but there were footprints in the mud, fresh ones. Back at the house, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The back door was ajar, and I knew I had locked it. That night, I started testing things. I placed a glass upside down in the sink, propped a chair against the back door, slipped a folded piece of paper between the curtain and the window. The next morning, the glass was upright. The chair moved slightly. The paper, gone. That's when I stopped feeling like I was alone and started feeling watched, but not chaotically. This wasn't random. This fear felt intelligent. I began keeping track of everything: times, noises, moved objects, strange feelings. Anything off, not out of obsession, out of self-preservation. I needed to know I wasn't imagining things. I kept a notebook on the dining table, until one day I found a note in it that I hadn't written. It was in my handwriting, but I hadn't written it. You wake up between 3:17 and 3:21 almost every night. Why? It was wedged between two normal entries, like it had always been there. That night, I woke at 3:19 a.m. The air in the room was warm, like someone had just left. There was a faint, sweaty smell. I stayed still, staring at the bedroom door. The silence was heavy, pressing. When I finally moved, I went to the kitchen, grabbed the carving knife. I locked every door, pushed the bookshelf against the front entrance. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the bedroom floor, my back to the wall, listening to the house breathe. The next morning, I decided to leave. I packed my bag, checked for my ID, gathered my notes. But when I opened the front door, I froze. The doormat was clean. That might not sound strange to you, but it had been raining all week. I'd been in and out every day. I never cleaned that mat. Inside the house, things felt off. The kitchen was tidier than I remembered. The chairs were perfectly aligned, and one of my shirts, which I had left crumpled on the bed, was now neatly folded inside my suitcase. The only thing missing? The knife, the one I'd left under the bed the night before. I sat on the edge of the mattress, heart racing, breathing shallow. It was like someone had been inside, but they didn't steal, didn't vandalize, didn't leave a trace. They just corrected. That night, back in my apartment, I didn't tell anyone, just said I came back early, that the trip wasn't what I needed. Days later, I found something by accident. An auto backup on my laptop, a short video recorded by the webcam, saved by an old editing app I hadn't used in years. I hit play. The footage lasted just over a minute. It showed me asleep. The image was dark but clear. For the first 40 seconds, nothing. Then, a faint movement. Bottom right corner of the frame, near the door. A shadow. It doesn't come in, doesn't speak, doesn't touch anything. It just watches. Then the video ends. The camera was shut off manually, and the file renamed with the wrong date. It's been almost 2 months since I got back, and every night before I sleep, I check my laptop's webcam just to make sure it's not on. My name is Felipe. I'm 32, a systems analyst, and I live alone in an old building downtown. I've always been a routine person. Wake up at 6:45, leave by 8, get home by 6:30 p.m. Dinner, a show, bed by 11. Same building, same floor, same apartment. 6B. The lady in 6A is elderly, barely leaves her place. In 6C, I've never seen anyone. Probably Airbnb guests. It was a Wednesday when I noticed the first thing. My apartment key slid in smoother than usual. Nothing dramatic, just slightly off, like the lock had been oiled. I ignored it, went inside. Everything looked normal. The next day, I found the TV remote on the couch, even though I clearly remembered leaving it on the table. Then the sponge from the sink appeared on the other side of the basin. Tiny things, but the more they added up, the more they unsettled me. I blamed exhaustion, thought I was forgetting stuff. Then I started taking photos. Every night before bed, I document the state of the living room and kitchen. 3 days later, I compared the photos and realized someone was touching my stuff. Not stealing, not breaking, just barely rearranging. That Friday, I got off work early. A coworker got sick and they sent us home. As I stepped into the building, everything seemed normal, except for a sound. The sound of a lock turning. From my floor, from my apartment. I went up slowly. When I reached the 6th floor, the hallway was empty. But my door was unlocked, not open. Not forced, just unlocked. I entered cautiously, key still in hand, quiet in every room. I opened doors slowly, recording everything on my phone just in case. No one. But in the kitchen, the dish towel folded differently, like someone had tried to replicate how I do it. And in the living room, a clean glass, upside down, one I hadn't washed. That night, I barely slept. I set up little traps, a hair placed near the doorframe, a piece of tape hidden on the inside edge of the door. 2 nights later, the hair was gone. The tape, torn clean in half. I went to the lobby and asked to check the cameras. The doorman looked up and said calmly, 6th floor cam's been down since last month. Wiring issue. I laughed, not out of amusement. From panic. I asked if anyone had been in or out. Just you, no one else since yesterday. I have a weird habit. Every night before bed, I slide the mattress a few inches to the left. There's an outlet on the right side that bugs me, so I move the bed to avoid seeing it. Every morning, the bed is back in the center. At first, I thought I was sleepwalking. Then I started measuring. I put tape on the floor, exact position markers, and each morning the bed was back in place. No noise, no struggle, no explanation. I started sleeping with a kitchen knife on my nightstand, changed the locks, added more security, even replaced the cylinder in the door. The next morning, the bed had moved again, and there was a new detail. My phone, front camera open. The videos showed my face, asleep. For the first few seconds, nothing. Then, at second 8, the screen shakes, like someone picked up the phone and set it gently back down. The next week, I went to the police. Photos, videos, notes, recordings, even the phone footage. The officer listened, watched everything with the face of someone who's seen worse. "You got renter's insurance?" he asked. like it was routine. I do, but nothing was stolen. He nodded. Sometimes it's not about stealing. Silence. We'll file a report, but with no break-in and no suspect, there's not much we can do. Before leaving, I asked, "Can you pull the building access logs?" He said yes, but it might take a few days. A week later, I got a call, a younger officer, his voice hesitant. "Mr. Felipe, we reviewed the entry logs, digital lock records, and system backups. And the strange thing is, there's no unauthorized access recorded in your unit. Not even before the lock change? Not even after. Then how?" He paused, then said, "No one entered. According to the records, no one ever left." My name is Cadence. I work the night shift at a small dive bar in a quieter part of my town. The place is right off the highway, but the parking lot also has a back entrance that leads into the town itself. It's nothing fancy, just a dimly lit spot where the regulars know each other by name, and the jukebox has been playing the same classic rock rotation for years. Most of our customers are locals, truckers passing through, and the occasional lost tourist looking for a strong drink. I like the job. The routine is predictable, the tips are surprisingly good, and I've learned how to handle all kinds of bar patrons, the talkers, the flirts, the quiet types, and the ones who just want to be left alone. Weekends are obviously more hectic, but the issue with working during the week is that I'm completely alone during the night shift. Not even a barback stops by. Sure, it's slower and the work is lighter, but I miss having co-workers around. I try to stay alert because bar fights do break out from time to time. Not surprising, given the kind of crowd we attract. That's why I noticed the guy immediately when he walked in. It was just after 1 a.m. on a Tuesday. He looked like he was in his early 40s, but was incredibly well-groomed and sharp, not the type you usually see in this area. He wore a black turtleneck under a black trench coat, definitely well-dressed, but in a relaxed, effortless way. I don't know how to explain it, but he had this air of sophistication, the kind of quiet wealth that doesn't need to announce itself. He scanned the room calmly before walking straight over to the bar and taking a seat. I remember his posture was perfect, just a detail, but it stuck with me. When I approached, he glanced at the bottles behind me and ordered something top shelf without hesitation. As I poured his drink, he asked if I liked working there, smiling as he spoke. It was a normal enough question, so I answered honestly. I said yeah, and smiled back. I made a little joke about the types of customers we get. I wish I could say he gave me the creeps or sent off some weird energy, but he didn't. He genuinely seemed like a decent guy. The kind of friendly single dad you see at a little league game giving high fives to all the kids. We chatted for a while, which I didn't mind since the bar was nearly empty. Eventually, he asked if I'd ever thought about doing something bigger. I admit that was a little out of left field, but not totally creepy. I gave him my usual bartender smile and said I was happy for now. He nodded and took a sip of his drink, looking vaguely disappointed, for reasons I didn't understand. After a long pause, he asked what time I got off work. That one came out of nowhere. I hadn't picked up any flirty vibes from him, so I was disappointed to realize that the whole conversation might have just been another roundabout attempt to get my number. I gave him a vague answer, trying to be polite without encouraging him. Before he could say more, I busied myself wiping down the counter, but he didn't push it. He just smiled, like he already knew. He drained his drink, placed a crisp $100 bill on the bar like it was nothing, and left without another word. I was left a little intrigued. The conversation wasn't exactly weird, but it wasn't normal either. Something about the way he carried himself stayed with me, but I figured I'd never see him again. I was wrong. About a week later, he came back. Only this time, he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him. She caught my attention because I'd never seen her before. She looked to be in her mid-30s, but dressed in a way that didn't quite match her age. Trendy, but forced, like someone trying too hard to fit in with a younger crowd. I watched as the two approached the bar. Everything about her seemed rehearsed. Her smile, the way she leaned on the bar like we were old friends. Before even ordering, she gave me a compliment. "You're so pretty." Her fingers brushed my arm and lingered just a bit too long. I gave a polite laugh and thanked her, but I could immediately tell something was off about her. The man didn't speak, which was odd, considering how chatty he'd been before. They ordered drinks, and then the questions started flooding in. How long I'd been working there, how old I was, where I lived. I answered everything politely, but kept it short. It was obvious this wasn't small talk. She was studying me. At one point, she looked over at the man, and it felt like they were communicating without saying a word. Then she turned back to me and said she ran an exclusive event club. She leaned in and lowered her voice like she didn't want to be overheard. She said they were always looking for young, fun people for private parties, and that I'd make a killing. 10 grand for a weekend. I laughed nervously and said it sounded too good to be true. She insisted it was real and said plenty of girls like me worked with them. Her smile never changed, like it was frozen on her face. She kept circling back to the same words: fun, safe, exclusive. Then, casually, she said, "You should step outside for a second. There's someone who can explain it better." My heart started racing. I didn't bother hiding it anymore. "I'm good, thanks," I said firmly. No smile this time. Just then, a group of loud customers walked in. The woman's expression changed instantly. Her friendly mask slipped for just a second before she turned to the man beside her. Without another word, they left. I was shaken. I told my coworkers and my boss everything. He promised he was always 15 minutes away if I needed him, and that the security cameras would likely be enough to deter anything worse. Then, a few nights later, I saw the car. It was parked across the street with the engine off, just sitting there. I tried to ignore it, but as I walked to my car, that horrible feeling of being watched crept over me like static. As soon as I drove off, the car followed. It stayed just far enough behind to not be obvious, but every turn I made, it was still there. I took a random street. It followed. Another. Still there. Finally, without thinking, I pulled into the parking lot of a police station. The car sped off immediately. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong again. A few days later, on a slow weeknight, I was cleaning the bar near midnight when the door creaked open. It was her. I discreetly texted my boss. She walked slowly to the bar and sat down, hands folded, wearing that same fake smile. "Thought I'd come check on you," she said. My stomach turned. I told her we were closing and she needed to leave. She pouted and asked for just one old-fashioned. I thought about saying no, but decided to stall until my boss arrived. I turned around to make the drink. Then I heard it. That soft, unmistakable click of the front door shutting. I whipped around. She was gone. I rushed to the entrance. Through the glass, I saw a black van idling just outside. I locked the door immediately. Then came the sound of metal rattling at the back door. Someone was trying to get in. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could, a metal shaker, and held it like a weapon while dialing 911. The police wouldn't get there in time. I considered making a run for it out front, but I didn't. Then I saw headlights pulling into the lot. It was my boss. The noises at the back stopped instantly. Seconds later, the van peeled out of the lot. I hugged my boss and told him everything. He said he got the license plate. When the police arrived, they reviewed the security footage. It was worse than I imagined. Before the woman disappeared, 2 masked figures had been caught on camera crouching near the front door, waiting. There was another person in the back, pounding on the door, trying to flush me out the front. The license plate? Unregistered. It's been a while now, and still, no leads. The only good thing is that my boss doesn't let me work alone anymore. But even now, every time I'm scheduled for a night shift, I feel that same dread in my chest. I still wonder, how did they know I'd be working alone? And worse, what would have happened if I had run out the front? I used to work the night shift at a gas station called SLC Convenience Store, located on a remote stretch of highway. I say used to because after what happened a few months ago, I've never worked another night shift since. It was a small station, the kind that barely gets any customers after dark. Most of my shift was spent restocking shelves, wiping down counters, and occasionally ringing up a trucker or traveler passing through. I remember everything clearly. It was just after 2:30 in the morning. Even the truckers had dried up, and I basically had nothing to do. I was just scrolling through my phone, trying to kill time. At one point, I stepped outside to get some air. I rubbed my hands together against the cold and exhaled a few times, watching my breath disappear into the icy air. The parking lot was empty, just the pumps, the road, and a dark patch of trees in the distance. The neon sign flickered weakly, and I remember how damp the air was. You could literally see the mist hanging. Even with the highway not far off, it was eerily silent out there. Just as I was about to walk back toward the store, I noticed something move out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head quickly and saw someone standing behind one of the pumps. How had I not noticed him before? He was wearing a dark red hoodie with the hood up and had both hands in his pockets. There wasn't a car in sight, so clearly he wasn't there to fill up. What was strange was that he wasn't walking toward the store either. He just stood there, slightly turned toward the building, like he was watching me. I figured maybe he was waiting for someone. But there was something about the way he moved that made me uneasy. He kept shifting around in these little circles. I went back inside, but I kept watching him through the glass. I pretended not to notice, hoping someone would drive up to meet him or something. But after a few minutes, he started walking toward the door, slow at first, and then suddenly pushing it open like he had made up his mind all at once. He walked straight up to the counter without saying a word, just stared at me like he was sizing me up. Then, in a rushed, almost rehearsed tone, he muttered that his car had broken down just before the pumps. He said he needed a jump, or maybe just a little gas to get to the next town. I was stunned. He wasn't even trying to make his story believable. It was like he truly expected me to buy it. I offered to call a tow truck instead. No, he replied way too quickly, shaking his head. He said he just needed a flashlight, maybe some help checking under the hood. Something felt off. The way he talked, the way he watched me, it felt like a test. To be fair, it's not uncommon for strange people to walk into gas stations at that hour. I started wondering if maybe he really did need help and was just odd, or maybe high on something. I asked where his car was parked. He told me it was just past the highway entrance. I was obviously skeptical, but then he pointed to the monitor behind me. I looked at the screen, and to my surprise, there really was a car parked out there. I thought, crap, maybe this guy is actually telling the truth. But then it hit me. I had just been outside. I would have noticed a car sitting there. I looked back at the monitor and saw the faintest bit of movement near the rear bumper. Someone was crouched just barely out of view. A cold wave of dread hit me. I forced a casual smile and told him I'd help, but needed to grab my phone from the back office first. I turned slowly, not wanting to startle him. And the moment I was out of his line of sight, I slammed my hand on the emergency panic button under the counter. The alarm went off instantly, blaring through the store. I expected him to attack me, but what he did instead was even more unsettling. His nervous energy vanished. No more fake urgency, no more pacing. He relaxed. His whole posture shifted. And then he smiled. Not a panicked smile, not an embarrassed one either. A slow, knowing grin, like he had all the time in the world. Like this was funny to him. I was frozen. I didn't even have time to react. In one smooth motion, he turned and bolted. I ran to the monitors just in time to see both of them, the guy and the one hiding, take off. Not toward the car, but into the woods behind the station. The car just sat there. Engine off. Headlights off. No one inside. By the time the police arrived, it was just as I'd seen it. The car was still there, but the men were gone. No footprints leading away. No sign of them anywhere. Then one of the officers pointed something out. Something I hadn't noticed. The front passenger door was open. There had been a third person inside the whole time. The police took my statement. I turned over the security footage. That was that. A few days later, they followed up with me. The car had been towed and the plates ran. Turned out it had been reported stolen nearly a week earlier, over 100 miles away. No one came forward to claim it. No missing persons reports. No other crimes connected to it. Just an abandoned vehicle in the middle of nowhere, with no explanation. That was months ago, and still, nothing. I don't know why convenience stores are such popular targets, but I can say for sure, I'm never working a night shift again. I work the night shift at Walmart. It's not the worst job in the world, but after a while it starts to feel like you're just floating through time. The nights blur together. Same shelves, same routine, same dull hum of the overhead lights. Hopefully, something better comes along soon. I usually hang out in and stock the electronics section, which is nice because it's quieter than the other areas. People don't exactly rush in at 2 a.m. to buy phone chargers or Bluetooth speakers. Most of the customers are either night owls killing time or truckers grabbing last-minute supplies before heading back on the road. That's why I noticed him. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another guy wandering the aisles, probably waiting for someone. But after a few minutes, I realized he wasn't shopping. He wasn't even pretending to. He just kept appearing. Every time I looked up, he was there, lingering in the next aisle or standing too still by the clearance section. He wasn't looking at anything. He was just standing there, watching me. I told myself I was overthinking. The store is big. Maybe he was just taking his time. But the way he moved, always just close enough for me to notice, never actually picking anything up, triggered something deep in my gut. I was on edge. I was waiting for him to just get on with it and ask for my number, but he never approached me. It was like he wanted me to see him, which made no sense. I went to radio someone about it, but realized the batteries must have died. The radio wasn't working. Eventually, I started debating whether I should go find a manager when I felt a hand wrap around my arm. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Before I could react, a woman's voice rang out, loud, friendly, overly familiar. "There you are," she said, before going on a little spiel about how she'd been looking all over for me. I turned, completely thrown off, and saw a woman I had never seen before in my life. She was smiling, her grip firm on my arm like we were old friends reuniting. Before I could say anything, she leaned in and whispered, her tone dropping to something low and urgent. "That guy's been recording you. Follow me." My stomach dropped. I turned my head just enough to glance back. The man was still there. Only now he wasn't even pretending to browse. He was staring right at me. A cold wave of fear crept over me. I let her pull me. I didn't even question it. The way she grabbed my arm, the way she spoke so loudly and casually, like we were two old friends, I clung to it. I was beyond grateful that someone had noticed what was going on and put herself in an uncomfortable situation just to help me. She kept up the act as we walked, rambling about something, maybe a trip she took, maybe an inside joke we supposedly shared. I barely processed the words. My thoughts were stuck on him. Had he really been recording me? That was creepy as hell. I wanted to know if he was still following us, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around. Not yet. The woman steered me through the aisles quickly. I barely noticed where we were going, only that we were going. The distance between me and that man was growing. Honestly, I expected her to drop the act at some point, but she didn't. At one point, it was getting a little uncomfortable. So I glanced behind me, and to my relief, the man was no longer following. But the woman kept pulling me forward. I told her we were good now and that we should probably go find my manager, but she just tightened her grip, telling me the guy was still lurking. I thought to myself, so what? What was he going to do in a store full of employees? At first, I'd been scared because no one was around. But now that I wasn't alone, I started realizing there wasn't much reason to be afraid anymore. I told her that, but she kept moving. I told her I was serious and planted my feet, twisting my arm slightly to loosen her grip. "You can let go now," I said. But she didn't. She smiled at me. But something about that smile was off. "Come on, just a little further," she said, basically tugging me at that point. I looked around. The store was basically dead. We'd passed the registers, the self-checkout, the aisles with the most foot traffic. Ahead was the warehouse section, dimly lit and nearly empty. Beyond that, the side exit, the one without cameras, the one employees used to unload shipments. That's when it hit me. She was leading me straight to the exit. I just screamed for help as I yanked my arm free from her grasp with all my strength. She lost her grip just enough for me to break away. I didn't waste another second. I turned and ran toward the front of the store. As I fled, she shouted something behind me, told me to come back, followed by my name. My name. I never gave her my name. I kept running until I saw one of my coworkers rushing toward me, probably reacting to my screaming. I told him to call security, which he did immediately. But the woman was long gone. By the time I told security what happened, neither she nor the man were anywhere to be found. They reviewed the security footage, and just like I suspected, the woman and the man had walked into the store together. She'd been with him the entire time. The man's face was clear as day in one of the frames, but hers, she always kept it turned away. I had a feeling she was the mastermind behind it all, so I was furious that the cameras hadn't captured her face. Every second of it had been planned. The police got involved, and the whole thing went down as a failed abduction attempt. I'm still waiting for some resolution. The man should be easy to track down since his face was caught on camera. But I have no idea how that woman knew my name. And that's what scares me the most. They hadn't picked me at random. I was a direct target. My friends always say I'm the kind of person who needs to be alone from time to time. And maybe they're right. After the messy breakup with Julie and getting fired from the hospital, I felt like I deserved some time away from everything. Away from the city, from social media, from the voices that kept echoing in my head. That's how I found that cabin. Rented through a hosting app, the cover photo showed a wooden porch surrounded by tall pines, a hammock hanging gently, and a breeze you could almost hear just by looking. 40 minutes south of Asheville, North Carolina. The listing promised absolute silence and complete isolation. It seemed perfect. I arrived on a Friday night, carrying just a backpack, a cooler with beers, some books, and my laptop. The gravel road made the car rattle like it was protesting, but the scenery made up for it. No visible neighbors, no cell signal, just forest and sky. The first night was peaceful, cold but peaceful. I lit the fireplace, made some simple pasta, and fell asleep to the sound of branches cracking in the fire. Saturday, I woke up early and walked to a nearby creek, took a deep breath. The place was even better than the photos. I spent the day reading and trying to write, without much success, I admit. At night, I grilled a steak, opened another beer, and fell asleep in the armchair with a book on my chest. I woke up Sunday with a strange feeling, a cold that didn't come from the weather, but from inside. When I opened the front door, I noticed something on the porch floor, an egg. It was one of those hand-decorated Easter eggs, blue and white, with delicate patterns around it, and in the center, in red ink, my name, Michael. I stood there for a few seconds, staring. My first instinct was to laugh. It had to be some kind of joke from the property owners, or maybe someone from the area trying to give a local touch to the experience. But the detail of my name, that made me hesitate. I picked up the egg. It was real, fragile, had been emptied and painted. Inside, nothing, just a hollow sound when I shook it. I left it on the kitchen table and tried not to think about it. In the afternoon, I grilled a small barbecue on the porch. The forest was a static painting, no sign of life beyond a squirrel or two. For a moment, I felt at peace again. But that night, I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was my imagination, or maybe some animal. But the steps were on the wooden porch. Slow, 4 or 5 steps. Then silence. I didn't have the courage to open the door. I spent the rest of the night awake, listening to the clock ticking. The next morning, there was another egg. This time it was yellow with black stripes. Inside, a lock of hair. Dark, same shade as mine, and a rolled-up note written in childish handwriting. Don't oversleep. My heart raced. I turned the whole cabin upside down, looking for signs of a break-in. Nothing. The doors were locked, windows shut. But one thing was clear: someone had been inside. Someone knew who I was. Someone was watching me. I set up my phone as a makeshift camera, pointed it at the living room, left it recording overnight, hoping to capture nothing. But in the morning, there was another egg. Green. Inside, a small blue button, identical to one that had fallen off my shirt on Friday. And another note: "You snore." I watched the footage with trembling hands. At 3:14 a.m., a figure appeared. Short, hooded, entered through the back door like they already knew the place. Walked over to where I was sleeping on the couch, stood there watching me for a while, then calmly left. The image was grainy but clear enough. I packed in 10 minutes, ran to the car, started the engine, sped off. The gravel road felt narrower, darker. About 15 minutes later, I had to slam the brakes. A car was parked sideways across the road. Headlights on, no plates. I veered off into the woods, scraping the side of my car against branches and rocks. I didn't stop again. I drove for almost an hour until I found a police station in a small town. I walked in shaking, showed them the footage, told them about the eggs, the hair, the notes. The officers listened with neutral expressions, asked me to wait in a room. After a while, one of the officers called me in to give a statement. When he turned his back, I noticed something on his neck. A tattoo. A cracked egg with a spiral coming out of it. I didn't wait. Pretended to answer a call, asked to step outside for a second. Got in my car and drove aimlessly for hours until I pulled into a gas station with fluorescent lights and real people. I've never told this story to anyone else. I never rented a remote cabin again. They call me paranoid, and that's fine. Maybe I am. But what happened that Easter in that house has never left my mind. I still wake up wondering if it was all real, or if somehow I was erased. It was supposed to be a family holiday. Melissa, my wife, suggested we spend Easter with her parents at the property where she grew up in rural Illinois. I wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea, but I didn't want to seem absent. After everything we'd been through in the past few months, I thought being there would be important, to show I was still present. The trip took almost 5 hours. The road was monotonous, lined with dry cornfields and scattered barns. Melissa slept most of the way. When she was awake, she stayed on her phone, laughing at messages she didn't share with me. We arrived late Friday afternoon. The house was just as I remembered. Big, old, surrounded by tall grass. It had a heavy structure with thick columns and small windows. There was always a smell of damp wood, not exactly cozy. Her parents, Bill and Catherine, greeted us with restrained smiles. They'd always seemed more formal than warm. Her 2 younger siblings were there too. Andrew, who lived in a nearby town, and Emily, who had brought her new boyfriend, Ethan, for the first time. Ethan, tall, thin, sunken eyes. He didn't speak much, but everything he said carried weight. He was the kind of person you notice without knowing why. Everyone seemed enchanted by him, as if he were an old friend. At dinner that night, Bill offered him the best wine from the cellar. Melissa laughed at all his jokes. Emily touched him naturally. Even Catherine, always reserved, paid close attention to his every word. And me, I just watched. On Saturday, we spent most of the day outside. Andrew grilled. Emily took pictures of everything. Ethan disappeared for a few hours. When I asked where he was, Catherine replied, "He likes to walk around. He knows the area well." "Knows it well?" I asked without thinking. She just smiled. Melissa was distant. She said she was tired but avoided talking. I went to bed alone. In the middle of the night, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I thought about getting up but didn't want to seem paranoid. Sunday, Easter. The table was immaculate. Marked seats, aligned plates, fresh flowers. Bill was in high spirits. He gave an emotional toast about the strength of family. Melissa held Ethan's hand during the speech. They let go when they saw me looking. That's when it started. Small details. A photo on the shelf showed the family in front of the house. In the corner, where I remembered standing, now stood Ethan. Same haircut, same outfit I wore last summer. But the face wasn't mine. My clothes in the bedroom had been moved. One of my shirts was missing. In the bathroom, my toothbrush had been replaced with another. When I tried talking to Melissa, she said I was overreacting, that I needed rest. That night, I heard laughter coming from the basement. It was late. I went down slowly. The door was ajar. I peeked. Down there, Catherine, Bill, Andrew, Emily, Melissa, and Ethan were sitting around a wooden table. There was a notebook in the center. They all stared at it. Ethan spoke softly. Melissa smiled. I returned to the room without making a sound. The next day, while everyone went for a walk, I went into the basement. The notebook was still there. Inside, old newspaper clippings, family photos, but not how I remembered. In every picture I should have been in, Ethan appeared instead. I found an envelope with documents, a will, signed by Bill and Catherine. Ethan's name was there. As a son-in-law, as a family member. Birthday photos, dates before I even married Melissa. He had already been there, already part of it all. I left the house without a word, drove to the next town and went straight to the police. I told them everything. Showed a photo on my phone that I remembered taking with Melissa in front of the house. Now the image showed only her, alone. The officer looked at me like I was insane. When we returned to the house, it was locked. No cars out front, no lights. I knocked. No one answered. We left. I had no proof, no witnesses, nothing. Months later, I tried calling Melissa. Her number was disconnected. I searched social media. No profiles. Not hers, not her parents, not her siblings. But I found a property record in the name of Ethan Ramos. Same location, same house. Today I live alone in a small apartment in Springfield. I work at a hardware store. No one asks about my past, and I don't tell. I never believed in brainwashing until that Easter. They say friendships fade if you don't take care of them. Maybe that's true. Lindsay and I hadn't seen Josh and Sabrina in over 6 years. Not since our wedding, actually. They moved out west, had a kid, who we never met, dropped off social media for a while. Life just drifted. Then, out of nowhere, Lindsay got a message from Sabrina. Friendly, warm, suggesting a reunion over Easter weekend. We rented a place in Ohio, Sabrina wrote. Quiet, cozy, perfect for catching up. Bring wine. Bring stories. Lindsay was thrilled. She always had a soft spot for nostalgia. I wasn't against a quiet weekend out of town. We didn't have kids, weren't close to our families, and hadn't traveled juntos in months. So I said sim. ¿Por qué no? The drive took 4 hours, long, empty roads. We passed silos, grain elevators, and stretches of woods that looked identical no matter how far we went. Lindsay played old playlists from college. We laughed at our younger selves, the way people do when they think they've grown out of things. The house was beautiful, 2 stories, white siding, blue shutters, set on a large open field bordered by trees with a wraparound porch and a swing hanging from an old oak. Josh and Sabrina were already there when we arrived. They looked older, of course. Josh had gone gray at the temples, and Sabrina had lines around her mouth I didn't remember. But they looked good, solid, the kind of couple that didn't waver. They hugged us like family. Sabrina smelled like rosemary and something powdery. Josh had that same laugh, sharp and fast. "You made it," he said. "We were starting to bet if you'd get lost in the cornfields." We laughed, unpacked, settled in. The house, supposedly rented through a private site, was fully furnished, not just with basics, but with care. Framed pictures, cozy throw blankets, spices labeled in cursive. It felt lived in. "We found it last year," Sabrina said. "Stayed once and fell in love." That night we made dinner together. Pasta, wine, the kind of thing you do when you're trying to bridge years in one evening. Lindsay was radiant. She always was in groups. I mostly listened, watched. They told stories about homeschooling their son, about leaving tech behind, about making space for people who matter. That phrase struck me. It sounded rehearsed. They had a rhythm between them, Josh and Sabrina. Not just chemistry, but choreography. They finished each other's sentences. Their glances carried whole subtexts. The first thing that felt off happened Saturday morning. I woke up early, went to make coffee. The filter was already in place, the exact brand we used at home. Our mugs, the same brown ceramic set Lindsay bought on Etsy, were sitting out. I assumed Lindsay had unpacked them, but she hadn't. "That's weird," she said later. "I never touched the kitchen." I asked Sabrina about it. She smiled. "We just wanted it to feel familiar. Thought you'd like the surprise." I didn't know what to say. After breakfast, Josh offered to take us around the property. The trails, the orchard, the old barn. He knew every inch of the land. "Wait," I asked, trying to keep it light. "I thought this was a rental." Josh paused, then nodded. "Right, it is. Just, we come a lot. Feels like home, you know?" That night, I couldn't sleep. Lindsay was snoring softly beside me. I walked downstairs. In the kitchen, the lights were dim. I heard low voices. Josh and Sabrina were in the living room, talking. "She's already on board," Sabrina said. "He's the one still unsettled. He will come around, they always do." I stepped back, quiet. My heart thumped in my throat. I didn't tell Lindsay. What would I even say? Sunday morning, Easter. The table was set, formal, napkins folded, name cards. "We thought we'd do something nice," Sabrina said. "Real family style." She placed her hand on Lindsay's shoulder. Lindsay smiled, touched it gently. Something had shifted. Lindsay was quieter. She deferred to Sabrina constantly, took her side in every debate, quoted her. I tried to get signal to check my email. No bars. "Reception's always tricky here," Josh said. "We can take your phones if you want. Less stress." He said it like a joke. That afternoon, while the others went walking, I went looking. The garage was locked. So was the shed. But in the upstairs office, behind a loose panel, I found a small tin box. Inside, Polaroids, dozens, each one of a different couple. In the same house, same porch, same angle. Some were old, faded, others recent. One showed a man I swear I recognized, a guy from a hiking group I followed online, gone without a trace last year. Another showed Josh and Sabrina, with two people I didn't recognize, holding hands, smiling, staring at the camera like they belonged. There was also a notebook. Handwritten entries, dates, names, observations. Final notes like absorbed, resistant, partial integration. My hands were shaking. I confronted Lindsay that night. She denied everything, said I was paranoid, tired, delusional. She said Sabrina had been nothing but kind, that Josh was a good man, that maybe I needed help. I told her we were leaving. She said she was staying. I packed my bag, quietly, took the keys, went to the car. The battery was gone. I ran into the trees. I didn't have a plan, just away. I don't remember much after that. I must have passed out. A truck driver found me on the side of the road the next morning, took me to a hospital. The police went to the house. No one was there. No sign of Josh or Sabrina. No Lindsay. No photos. No notebook. The house was owned by a Sabrina Walters since 2009. She said she hadn't rented it in years. I showed them the Polaroids. They were gone from my bag. Today I live alone. 1-bedroom apartment. I don't talk much. I work. I sleep. I keep my doors locked. I don't tell people what happened, but I remember every second. You don't have to be chained to a place to be trapped. You just need to feel at home. This happened when I was just a kid, probably around 6 or 7 years old. My family has always been deeply religious, so Easter was a really big deal for us. Honestly, most religious holidays were, and now that I think about it, even Sundays felt like mini holidays because of how seriously my parents took church. It's kind of funny. Some of my earliest memories are tied to church, and what I'm about to share with you is one of them. It was Easter Sunday, and that meant the church services were extra long. I didn't mind though. My parents had planted the love of Christ in me early on. After the main service, we had Sunday school, or CCD, as our church called it. I know some churches skip Sunday school after the bigger services, but ours never did. So just like always, my parents walked me downstairs to the classrooms and said goodbye. Let me explain the layout of the church so the rest of the story makes sense. The building was split level. The main sanctuary, where the pews and altar were, was upstairs. All the classrooms were in the lower level, which was technically the basement. But since the church sat on a slope, that level had its own separate entrance and exit. Downstairs, there was a long hallway with carpet and about 7 or 8 rooms on each side, each one grouped by age. My class was one of the first rooms on the left. At the far end of the hallway were 2 bathrooms, one for boys and one for girls. And right next to those was a big, heavy gray door that led outside. That door was almost always locked from the inside, but I remember being told it could be used if there was ever an emergency. The adults would constantly remind us never to go out through that door because it would lock automatically and we wouldn't be able to get back in. Anyway, back to that day. The lower level was totally decked out for Easter. I mean, it was covered in decorations. The walls were lined with pastel-colored streamers, paper lambs, crosses, and drawings of Jesus with kids taped between the classrooms. Some of the teachers even wore those goofy bunny ears you can buy at drugstores. Honestly, it felt more festive downstairs than it did in the sanctuary. The kids were in a good mood too, probably because everyone knew there'd be egg hunts later on. Normally, I'd wait until the class was over to use the bathroom, but because the Easter service had gone on for so long, I couldn't hold it. I raised my hand, asked to go, and the teacher let me leave. The bathrooms were maybe 15 feet down the hallway, and it wasn't unusual for kids to go alone. The rule was that if we took too long, someone would come check on us, but I don't think that ever actually happened. So I slipped out quietly while the rest of the class was busy coloring pictures of the empty tomb and Jesus rising from it. I went into the boys' bathroom and closed the stall door behind me. It was quiet in there. The only sounds were the low buzz of the old fluorescent lights and the faint echo of a teacher's voice down the hall. Then, while I was sitting there, I heard this strange scraping noise coming from the next stall. It didn't sound like normal movement, not like someone shifting or unbolting a lock. It was slow and metallic, like something was being dragged or scratched against the inside of the door. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. I wasn't really scared, just confused. At first, I figured it was just another kid, so I stayed quiet and finished up. When I got up to wash my hands, I looked in the mirror. And that's when I saw the stall door next to mine slowly swing open. But instead of seeing another kid, it was a grown man wearing a full Easter bunny costume. I clearly remember how the ears flopped forward a bit and how strange the suit looked, saggy, stained in a few spots, like it hadn't been cleaned in years. The fur wasn't bright white. It had this dingy gray tint, and one of the costume's eyes looked like it had been sewn back on crooked. Still, I didn't feel afraid. Not right away. I was so young, and in my head, this was just the Easter bunny showing up for a surprise visit. I actually smiled and turned around. I think I even said something like, "Hi." He didn't answer, just stood there, halfway out of the stall, staring at me. His head was tilted a little and he didn't move. I started to feel awkward, unsure if I was supposed to say something else. Then, after a long pause, he stepped out fully and slowly lifted one arm, pointing toward the exit, like he was guiding me out. That's when he finally spoke. His voice was muffled behind the costume, but I'll never forget what he said. "You're the lucky, chosen child. I have something special for you outside." I didn't hesitate. I was excited, genuinely thrilled at the idea that I had been picked for some kind of Easter surprise. I think the fact that we were in church made me feel safer than I should have. Without thinking, I pushed open the heavy gray door. I didn't even stop to remember that it was supposed to stay locked. The Easter bunny followed behind me in silence. We started walking across the church parking lot toward the far corner. I noticed a car parked way back there, mostly hidden by the dumpster and some overgrown bushes. I remember thinking it was odd he had parked so far away, and that he didn't have a basket or candy or anything. At one point, he held my hand. We were about halfway across the lot when I saw something that made me freeze. Another Easter bunny stepped out of the car he was taking me to. I stopped walking completely. My little brain didn't know what to make of it. I looked back and forth between them, completely confused. I hadn't seen that car before, and now there were two bunnies. Whatever magic I thought was happening vanished. Something felt wrong. To this day, I believe what happened next was divine intervention. One of the teachers, I think her name was Miss Sabrina, just happened to be outside, maybe setting up for the egg hunt or checking on something near the lot. She looked over at the exact moment I was being led toward the car. I will never forget the sound she made, the loudest, most terrified scream I've ever heard. The man in the costume instantly let go of my hand and bolted for the car, and I, without even thinking, ran the opposite direction, straight into Miss Sabrina's arms. Once I was safe, I turned and caught one last look at the car as it sped away. I'm not totally sure, but I swear I saw another kid in the back seat. Miss Sabrina didn't see, but I told her, and she believed me. The rest of the day is kind of blurry. She got the other adults right away, and later the police came and had me tell them everything that happened. They asked about the kid I saw in the car, and I tried to describe him, even though it was just for a split second, and I wasn't sure if my mind was making it up or not. My parents were devastated. My mom cried for what felt like hours once we got home. The police followed up with the church, but nothing ever came of it. No missing kids were reported in the area, so they didn't have much to investigate. The main theory was that whoever was in that costume had somehow gotten a key to the back door and had been hiding in the bathroom, just waiting. And by sheer bad luck, I was the kid who walked in. What really unsettles me is how well that person must have known the church, where to park, where to wait, how to slip away unnoticed. But the thing that haunts me the most? I still believe there really was another child in that car. And every Easter since, I think about what could have happened if Miss Sabrina hadn't been there at that exact moment. I graduated high school last year, and it was around that time that the story I'm about to tell you took place. Easter had always been a fun time for me and my friends, but not for the reason you might think. We had outgrown those silly little egg hunts that kids do, and honestly, I would cringe whenever my parents made me join one with my younger cousins. A few years back, I can't remember exactly when, my friends and I came up with our own version of an Easter egg hunt. A kind of mix between a classic egg hunt and a game of manhunt. It wasn't anything too fancy, 2 teams, like in manhunt, but the seekers also had to hide and defend a few eggs. If the hiders managed to capture all the eggs, they'd win. And if the seekers didn't find all the hiders before the time ran out, the hiders won too. There were other random rules, like how seekers couldn't camp near the eggs, but that's not really important to this story. It was the Thursday before Easter, and school had been cancelled for the next day for some reason, so we decided to have a sleepover. It was me, Jake, Race, Chuck, Arthur, and Raz. Raz wasn't actually his first name. His last name was Razzie, but everyone just called him Raz. His house was by far the biggest, so it's where we always hung out. He lived way out in the middle of nowhere, and his backyard bordered a pretty big wooded area. Plus, his parents were out of town until Friday night, so we had the whole place to ourselves. We were just hanging out in his basement playing video games when Chuck suggested we play manhunt. Everyone was down, so we grabbed whatever flashlights Raz had in the garage and used a random number generator on Jake's phone to make fair, unpredictable teams. I ended up on a team with Chuck and Raz, and we were the seekers. Jake and Arthur would be hiding. Raz's mom had a ton of plastic Easter eggs upstairs, so we grabbed a few and all headed outside. We'd played out there plenty of times before, so we already knew the layout. The far edge was a fence, and the rest was bordered by a creek and a sloped hill that ran down toward Raz's neighbor's horse pasture. We set 10-minute timers on our phones, time for the hiders to hide, and for us to hide our eggs too. Once the 10 minutes passed, the game officially began. Worth noting, the sun had already set, but it wasn't totally dark yet. Once the timer went off, we split up to cover more ground. I veered left into a thicker patch of woods while Raz and Chuck went in the other direction. I kept my hand over the flashlight, only shining it down every few steps so I wouldn't trip. But I mostly relied on the moonlight. The game felt way more exciting when you had to actually sneak around. And besides, if a hider saw a flashlight coming, they'd just take off running. A few minutes in, I thought I saw something move about 20 to 30 feet in front of me. At first, I wasn't sure if I was just seeing things, but then I saw it again. I turned off my flashlight and froze. Someone was crouched behind a tree. Whoever it was didn't see me, otherwise they'd definitely have run. They were staying completely still, like they were trying not to be noticed. I figured it was probably Race. He always liked to hide close to the seekers, thinking no one would expect that. I decided to sneak up on him. I crouched slightly and slowly made my way around behind him. Once I was close enough, I lunged and tapped the person on the shoulder, shouting, "Gotcha!" But the second he turned around, I felt pure fear rush through me. It wasn't one of my friends. It was a grown man with slicked back hair and wild, bugged-out eyes, like he was on something. His clothes were torn and filthy, and he reeked. I was so shocked I couldn't even process what was happening. Before I could react, he tackled me to the ground. I screamed as I hit the dirt, but before I could scream again, his hands were around my neck. He pushed down with all his weight. In that moment, I honestly thought I was going to die. I couldn't breathe. I didn't have the strength to fight back. And then he stopped. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flashlight beam bouncing through the trees. One of my friends must have been running toward us. The guy must have seen it too, because without a word, he jumped off of me and ran off into the woods, disappearing almost instantly. I just lay there, gasping for air, too stunned to move. Seconds later, Chuck reached me, helped me up, and told me he saw the whole thing. I wanted to chase after the guy, but Chuck told me that was a terrible idea. So the two of us ran back toward the house instead. Chuck called the others and told everyone to meet back at Raz's place. Once we all gathered, I told them what had happened. Chuck filled in the rest of the details. Everyone started freaking out and talking over each other until Arthur said something that made everyone go quiet. He said that before the game even started, meaning before the 10-minute countdown, he saw two people walking through the woods near his hiding spot. He said they were moving slow, like they were watching or waiting for something. At the time, he got annoyed because he thought it was two seekers breaking the rules and teaming up. That's when Chuck, Raz, and I all looked at each other and shook our heads. None of us had been walking together, and even if we had, there wasn't enough time for us to get over to that side of the woods so quickly. That's when it hit us. If it wasn't any of us, then there were at least 3 strangers in those woods that night. One who attacked me, and 2 others walking around before the game even began. That's when I realized how smart it was to listen to Chuck and not go chasing after that guy. I could have walked straight into an ambush. I told everyone we needed to call the police. I mean, I was literally attacked. But the second I said that, Raz cut me off. He suddenly got serious and said, "No, we're not calling anyone." I asked him what he meant, and he explained that he was technically grounded and, on top of that, not allowed to have guests over while his parents were gone. If the cops got involved, he'd be in serious trouble. I told him this wasn't just some dumb sleepover. It was serious, but he wouldn't budge. The rest of the guys were stuck in the middle. No one wanted to throw Raz under the bus with his parents, but I could tell they weren't okay with just pretending nothing happened. Eventually, I gave in and agreed not to call the police. I tried to enjoy the rest of the night, but I was still shaking. I went to bed early and left Raz's house the next morning before anyone else was awake. Now, this might surprise you, but I wasn't all that traumatized by the whole thing. I'm the type of person who believes things happen and you've got to move on. So that's what I did. About a week later, Raz told us he felt guilty about leaving the eggs out in the woods, so he went back to get them, even though he was scared out of his mind. We all laughed at that, but it made me think back on that night and on how differently things could have ended. To this day, I have no idea what those men were doing out there. But I know one thing for sure. I won't be sleeping at Raz's house again anytime soon. I'm in college now, far, far away from Raz's backyard. But with Easter coming up next month, I couldn't help but remember it all again. Every Easter, my whole extended family takes a trip to my Uncle John's house, who lives way out in the countryside. Last year was no different. Uncle John lives in a huge house, set on a wide open piece of land, surrounded on all sides by forest. Even though I've been there many times, seriously, a lot, I had never actually wandered into the woods behind his house. I've never been the outdoorsy type, so I never had much interest in nature. To be honest, I was dreading the trip. I've never really related much to that side of my family. They're all super into nature, hunting, fishing, that sort of thing. And most of them have lived in the same small town their whole lives. Every time I'm around them, I feel like the odd one out. Most of my cousins are way older than me, already married with kids or working on some farm. The only one even remotely close to my age is Kevin. He's a few years older, but he's chill. We always end up sticking together on these trips, just by default. He knows I don't really fit in, so he hangs with me without making things weird. We arrived at Uncle John's house late Friday night. I'm an only child, so it was just me and my parents in the car. I was wiped out from the drive, so I went to bed pretty much immediately. The next morning, Kevin and I spent a couple of hours in the basement playing pool. Neither of us was any good, but it was better than hanging out upstairs. The house was already packed with family by then. You know how chaotic holidays can get. We stayed downstairs most of the time, trying to avoid the noise. There was no TV down there, so Kevin played music from his phone, and we chatted about some dumb family drama, nothing worth repeating here. While we played, Kevin started talking about the woods behind the house. He said they stretched on for miles and that hardly anyone ever ventured deep enough to see the really interesting stuff out there. He described it as magical, peaceful, and isolated. I just nodded along. Nature talk wasn't really my thing, but he clearly loved it. Somehow, later that day, Kevin convinced me to go on a walk with him through the forest. Like I said, nature isn't my vibe at all, but I was bored out of my mind, so I agreed. We told Uncle John where we were going, of course. He's super chill and always lets the younger ones do what they want, a mindset I wish my parents had. Once outside, Kevin led the way, cutting across the backyard and into the woods like he'd done it 100 times before, which, knowing him, he probably had. The forest was thick, but not completely wild. There was a kind of natural path that Kevin followed. It was still early in the day, so I wasn't too worried about the sun setting. But the deeper we went, the more I started wondering how we were going to find our way back. After about 20 minutes of walking, I asked Kevin if he was sure he knew where we were. He just laughed and said he knew those woods like the back of his hand, that he'd been exploring them since he was a kid. We walked for maybe another 20 minutes when we both stopped at the exact same time. From somewhere up ahead, we heard a loud thunk, like something heavy hitting wood. It didn't sound like an animal or someone stepping on a branch. It was rhythmic. A hit, a pause, another hit, another pause. The best way I can describe it. It sounded like a hammer or mallet pounding on a tree. Kevin looked at me, and I could tell he was trying to figure it out too. The sound wasn't too close, but it was clear. He said it could be a hunter out there, but even so, he looked a bit unsettled. Eventually, the sound stopped. I asked if he wanted to head back, but he shook his head. Now he was curious. And I'll admit, so was I. So we kept walking in the direction we thought the sound had come from. Both of us much more alert now. We had only gone a few more minutes when Kevin suddenly stopped and held his arm out in front of me. I froze, thinking maybe he saw someone. But then he pointed up into the trees. At first, I didn't get it. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be seeing. But then it hit me. There were 3 upside-down crosses nailed to 3 different trees, way higher than anyone could have reached without a ladder, easily 15 to 20 feet off the ground. Before we could even turn to leave, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I whipped my head around, and to my horror, there was a man standing there, watching us. He was dressed like a lumberjack, thick beard, heavy clothes, and he had this cold, dark stare. Kevin stepped in front of me, partially blocking the man's view of me. The man looked right at me and said, "You shouldn't be here." Kevin quickly apologized and said we were leaving, and that's exactly what we did. The man didn't move. He just stood there and stared us down the entire time as we walked away. My hands were shaking. We didn't say a word the whole walk back. I've never experienced such a tense moment in my life. We kept looking back, trying to make sure we weren't being followed. But there was no way to be sure. When we finally got back to the house, we told Uncle John everything right away. Like I said, he's a friendly guy and knows all his neighbors. That's why it made my stomach drop when he said he didn't recognize the man from our description. He asked several times if we were sure we hadn't been followed. We told him no, there wasn't much else to do. Someone even brought up the idea of arming up and searching the woods, but Uncle John didn't want to escalate things or lead anyone back to the house. Kevin and I went back downstairs, and the rest of the family kept getting ready for Easter like nothing had happened. But that encounter messed with my head way more than I let on. I went to bed early just to distract myself. But because of that, I ended up waking up way earlier than usual. I rolled over, checked my phone. It was just after 5 a.m. The sun was barely starting to rise, but it was still mostly dark out. I tried going back to sleep, but couldn't, so I decided to start the day early. Uncle John has a study on the 3rd floor, so I went up there to see if he had any interesting books. His study has this big window that overlooks the entire backyard. As I walked past it, something caught my eye. There was a faint, flickering glow coming from the edge of the woods. It looked like a small, pulsing fire. Definitely not a flashlight or anything artificial. I stared at it for maybe 30 seconds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Curiosity got the better of me, and I had to find out what it was. So I went downstairs and stepped onto the back deck. And when I realized what I was looking at, I had to literally fight back a scream. 3 figures were standing just beyond the tree line, each holding a small torch. They weren't walking. They weren't moving. They were just standing there, facing the house, facing me. I ran straight to Uncle John's room and woke him up, telling him everything I saw. Without asking a single question, he grabbed his rifle, threw on a pair of pants, and told me to stay inside. He stepped out onto the deck and scanned the yard, rifle in hand, while I watched from the doorway. But by then, those people had already disappeared into the woods. Without hesitation, Uncle John raised his rifle and fired 3 shots into the air. That woke up the entire house. The next 20 minutes were total chaos. I'll just say this: I can't think of a worse way to start an Easter morning. The whole holiday was ruined. Everyone stayed on edge the entire day. Eventually, it was time for my parents and me to leave. And honestly, I wasn't upset about it. This all happened about 9 months ago, and Uncle John has told us since then that he hasn't seen or heard anything strange again. Still, I can't imagine living in that house, knowing there are people like that lurking somewhere nearby. If Uncle John ever tells us anything new, I'll send an update. When I was 22, I started seeing a guy I met on a dating app. His name was Hunter. We went on about 4 dates over the span of a little more than a month. At first, everything seemed fine. Our first date was quick. Just a coffee, less than an hour. More like a screening to make sure he seemed normal. Our second date was at a nearby bar for drinks. We both got a little tipsy and it was a nice night. The third date was dinner. That's when I started to question things. To question whether I really clicked with his personality or if there was something just slightly off about him. The night ended with a kiss, the first and only one. I convinced myself that since I let him kiss me, maybe things were going okay. A couple of weeks later, we had our fourth and final date. We went out for drinks again, but this time I wasn't nearly as excited. I paid closer attention to little details in his behavior, things I now realized were unusual. It's hard to describe exactly, but some of his mannerisms gave off antisocial or even creepy vibes. He drank way too much that night and got very handsy, trying to kiss me multiple times. I'm not into public displays of affection, especially not sitting at a bar surrounded by strangers. I politely declined his advances, and a few minutes later, I said I was tired, heavily hinting that we should leave. He asked for the check, paid, and we got our coats. As we were walking to our cars, he stopped me and very bluntly asked if we could go home together. I said, "Not tonight, I'm tired and have work tomorrow," which was a lie, but he kept insisting, even saying he'd drive me to work in the morning. Whether he was drunk or not, it was absurd. I also didn't like the fact that he was about to drive home drunk. That was when I decided I wouldn't see him again. I walked to my car, which was parked across the street, and started driving home slowly. I had a few drinks in my system. I wasn't drunk, but I was cautious. I was also hyper-aware of my surroundings, scanning for cops. Maybe that's why I noticed that the same car had been behind me through 3 turns. At a red light, I realized it looked like Hunter's car. I texted him, "Are you following me?" He replied almost instantly, "Yes, just want to make sure you get home okay." I called him, but he didn't answer. That's when I started to feel creeped out. I pulled over and texted, "Stop following me, I'm fine." He stopped in the middle of the road for a second. I assumed to read the message. and then drove off. He didn't reply again. He only texted me later that night when I was already in bed. He said, "Hope I didn't weird you out tonight. Sorry for getting so drunk. Next time we should do something more low-key, like dinner at my place." I didn't respond. The next morning, he texted again. "Oh no, is the vibe dead?" Still, I waited a bit to respond. Less than 2 hours later, he sent just a question mark, so I figured I should reply before it escalated. I wrote, "Hey, I really enjoyed getting to know you, but I don't think our personalities match that well. I also want to focus on myself right now. Hope you understand." Then the angry messages started. The worst one said, "No, I don't understand. You strung me along for 4 dates just to say that? How about you pay me back for half of everything I spent on you?" There were other messages, more aggressive and containing personal information, stuff I won't repeat here, but it was enough for me to block him. I thought that was the end of it, but then I started getting non-stop calls from a private number. I ignored all of them until eventually he seemed to get the message and stopped. The next day, when my parents weren't home, I got home from work and found a bouquet of flowers on the doorstep along with a card. It was a note from Hunter apologizing and asking for a second chance. Somehow, he knew where I lived. That deeply disturbed me. In his mind, I guess he thought it was sweet or romantic. In reality, it was terrifying. I sent him a final long message telling him never to contact me again and never to come to my house again, or I'd file for a restraining order. I kept his number blocked, so I never saw if he replied. I thought it was over, but I was wrong. Not long after that, I was home alone one night. My parents' house is big and my room is a loft, the highest point in the house. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound. I wasn't sure what at first, but I felt like I was hearing noises from downstairs. I focused hard, and then I clearly heard a door opening. Upstairs, no one else was supposed to be home. Even half asleep, I immediately thought someone broke in. I got down on the floor and crawled under the bed with my phone. I called 911 and texted my family asking if anyone was home. I heard more noises in one of the other bedrooms. Then my bedroom door opened and someone came up the carpeted stairs. When they reached the top step, silence. The floor was carpeted, so I couldn't hear footsteps clearly. Then I heard the drawers near my bed opening. I covered my mouth with my hands to silence my breathing. My heart was pounding. I heard a man mutter, "God damn it," under his breath. And in that moment, I thought, that sounded like Hunter. I didn't move. I prayed my phone wouldn't light up. He started rummaging through everything, my drawers, my dresser. Then I felt the bed shift. He sat down. I could see the outline of his shoes through the bed skirt, even in the dark. I don't know what he was doing, but he sat there for what felt like 2 or 3 minutes. Then he got up and muttered, "Fuck this." I heard the drawers closing, then footsteps down the stairs, a door opening, and finally, silence. I whispered into the phone to 911, still under the bed, and stayed there for 10-15 minutes until a police officer arrived. Meeting him at the front door was terrifying in itself. But I let him in and told him everything. A second officer arrived, this one a woman, and they searched the house. All the windows were unlocked. One of them, in the dining room, was large enough for someone to crawl through, though no one ever imagined someone would push through the bushes and climb in that way. I gave my statement, got a case number, and the officers left. The next day, when my parents came back, they already knew everything. We went to the police station, gave them all the screenshots and texts, including the one where he admitted to following me home. They said they'd investigate, but without proof that it was him inside the house, things were tricky. Eventually, I did get a restraining order. I was advised never to accuse him of the break-in or contact him again. Thankfully, he never contacted me again either. But until the day I moved out of my parents' house, I never felt truly safe. I always wondered if he was lurking around somewhere. And even now, sometimes I worry that he might find out where I live today. I was in the 6th grade when this happened. It all started during the week of Halloween. I stayed after school to help decorate the haunted house for the school's Halloween carnival. I loved hanging around with some of my friends while we helped and got rewarded with pizza. Along with us, there was another kid who also stayed late. I'll call him Chris. We got along during the entire time we stayed after school, and he never gave me any reason to feel uneasy around him. He was genuinely funny and a cool kid. But anyway, fast forward 2 weeks, a group of girls from my class came up to me, super excited and smiling. I asked them what was going on, and they told me I had a secret admirer and that he'd be messaging me that night. I'm not gonna lie, I was curious and a little excited. I wanted to know who it was. Later that night, just as I was getting ready for bed, I got a notification from Messenger, the only app I used at the time to talk to my parents when I was home alone. The message was from Chris. I had completely forgotten I'd added him on Facebook during Halloween. I opened the message. It read, "Maya, I need to talk to you." I got a bit worried and replied quickly, "What's going on? Is everything okay?" To this day, I wish I hadn't replied. The typing bubble stayed on the screen for what felt like 2 full minutes. He was still typing. It felt like forever before his message finally came through. I wasn't ready for what I read. It was a long paragraph where he confessed his love for me, said I'd been driving him crazy since Halloween, and told me how he had tried to impress me during recess with his soccer skills, but I never seemed to notice him. He said he was tired of being ignored and ended with, "So what I'm trying to say is, will you be my girlfriend?" I cringed at every word. I just stared at the message. What the hell? I barely even knew this kid, and we had stopped talking a while ago. I tried to find a way to let him down gently. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I told him I didn't like him that way and that I'd rather just be friends. But I could tell right away that he didn't like that answer. He kept asking me why, and I had to come up with different reasons each time until eventually he stopped replying. The next morning was a nightmare. Some of his friends came up to me saying Chris wanted to kiss me, something he apparently told the whole grade, and they said he'd do it even if he had to corner me. I took that as a threat and told my teacher. She told me to stay inside during recess and lunch, and that if he got anywhere near me, I should run straight back to the classroom. But that wasn't enough for me. I went to the principal and told him everything. He said he'd take care of it right away, which gave me some relief. I should mention I lived right across the street from the school, and everyone knew that, including Chris. Which brings me to what happened next. Later that week, I was walking home. I hadn't even been inside for 2 minutes when someone knocked on the door. I looked out the window and saw someone ducking behind a parked car across the street. It had to be Chris. He must have followed me home. My mom opened the door and found a piece of paper on the ground, addressed to me. I read it aloud. It said, "There's a surprise waiting for you under the Cadillac in your driveway." At the time, that car belonged to my brother. My mom went to check but didn't find anything. But after that day, my brother's Cadillac stopped working. To this day, I have no idea what Chris did to it, but my brother ended up having to sell the car. Unfortunately, my nightmare didn't end there. I was constantly harassed by Chris's friends, telling me to give him a chance, that he'd treat me right. One time, I actually caught Chris taking a photo of me while I was walking home. The only reason I noticed was because I barely heard the iPhone camera sound behind me. Who knows how many pictures he had of me. Every morning, I'd wake up to a message from him saying things like, "Can't wait to see you at school," or "I bet you'll look beautiful today." The stalking and harassment were getting worse, and I was honestly scared, especially now that he knew where I lived. Finally, I got called into the counselor's office. I felt relieved, expecting to be told Chris was going to get punished, or maybe even the police would be involved. Anything. But what I heard was worse. The counselor told me, "Boys will be boys. They do crazy things when they're in love, and that I shouldn't be mad about it." She said I should feel flattered, that things like this were bound to happen to girls, and that the only thing I could do was accept it and learn from it. At the time, I didn't even realize how messed up that was. I believed her, but looking back now, it was absolutely insane and disturbing to say that to a 6th grade girl who was being harassed and feared for her safety every day. That afternoon, I went home and told my mom everything the counselor said. She was furious, rightfully so. Later that week, I was called into the principal's office again, but this time, my mom was with me. I clearly remember her saying to the counselor and the principal, "What are you waiting for? For something bad to happen to her before you do something?" She kept asking why it was taking so long for them to act. They both stayed completely silent. My mom ended it by threatening the counselor and telling her, "Don't ever talk to my daughter again unless I'm present." Unfortunately, I don't think the school ever punished Chris, and that still makes me angry to this day. He got away with everything, and it still wasn't over. The weekend night, while my parents were out shopping, I was just about to go to bed after watching a YouTube video on my iPad when I heard something hit my window. I'm on the 2nd floor, so that was strange. The only thing that ever hits my window is birds flying into it by mistake. I sat up and listened. It happened again. It sounded like someone was throwing something at the glass. Then again, and again. They were consistent thuds, and it started to really freak me out. I finally built up the courage to get out of bed and see what it was. My heart sank when I opened the curtain and looked down. Chris was standing there, holding a handful of rocks, looking straight up at my window. He had somehow figured out exactly which room was mine. He was about to throw another rock when he noticed me looking down. I could see he was saying something, but I didn't stay to find out what. I went around the house checking every door and window. Thankfully, everything was locked. When I came back to my room, I had 4 messages from Chris. "Why did you leave?" "I just want to talk." "I'm sorry, all I wanted was a kiss." "You're not who I thought you were. Bye." I blocked him after that. Thankfully, I never had another incident, though I still had to see him every year at school from 6th grade to senior year. The last I heard of him, he got arrested. God only knows for what. The saddest and scariest part of this whole story? A school counselor felt comfortable telling me this kind of behavior was a compliment and that it was just something girls have to learn from. I just hope that woman doesn't work with children anymore and that I never, ever see Chris again. I want to remain as anonymous as possible with this. It was a very serious situation that gave me PTSD and unfortunately left deep scars. I've changed all names and places in this story so that no one can trace it back to me. I've always been a very reclusive person ever since I was a kid. Even in elementary school, teachers would tell my parents I had antisocial behavior. I even participated in those special 20-minute speech and behavior sessions. Back then, I didn't understand why I had to be there while the rest of the class wasn't. Middle school was when the social hell of school really hit. Kids started forming their cliques, and it only got worse in high school. I never had learning difficulties, just social ones. They've improved with time, but I still consider myself introverted and a bit awkward. Even so, I've made close friends, and I'm thankful for that. But now, let's talk about girls. Of course, being socially reclusive comes with relationship struggles. To be direct, and this matters for the story, I lost my virginity at 21, which I guess is a little late. By the time of this story, I was 23, living on my own, already working in a well-paid field for a few years. I had bought a townhouse in my hometown, spacious and modern. The kind of place that impresses girls when you're 23 and you own it. One day, while swiping on Tinder, I matched with a really cute girl. Let's call her Emily. We went to a local restaurant for dinner. Throughout the date, I was in my own head, worried she was judging me or that I was acting awkward. So when I got home, I was sure she wouldn't want to see me again. But that same night, while I was in bed, she texted saying she really liked me and had fun. I was thrilled. We went on a second, third, and fourth date. Everything felt amazing once I got out of my head. We became an official couple pretty quickly. But the honeymoon phase didn't last forever. At first, you're excited every time they text or call. You crave the attention. Ideally, it's mutual. But gradually, I started feeling like she was texting me way too much, all day long. If I took too long to reply, she'd send or call. One day, while we were on the couch, she demanded that we share live location with each other. I wasn't happy about it, even though I had nothing to hide. But I did it. A couple of months into the relationship, with our locations now shared, things turned ugly. She began asking why I was at Phil's house and not replying. One night, I was at Phil's with my friend Mark in his basement, just hanging out, and Emily literally showed up at his house. Phil's mom brought her downstairs. Emily didn't hide her anger. She loudly scolded me in front of everyone, asking why I was messing around with friends instead of answering her texts about a winery visit the next day. I asked if we could talk about it later, but she insisted I leave with her. I apologized to my friends and went outside with her. We had an argument on the street. She wanted to come home with me, but I said no. We had driven separately. I drove home and told her not to follow me. Once home, I sent a long text saying I needed a break, that I needed space. Sure, maybe I should have done it in person. But honestly, I was afraid of her reaction face to face. Of course, she started calling non-stop, blowing up my phone. When I stopped replying, She banged on my front door, rang the doorbell relentlessly. My neighbor came outside and asked her what she was doing. I heard Emily screaming, calling me names. My neighbor stayed calm and asked her to go home. I listened to all of it with my ear pressed against the door. She finally left, but I was extremely disturbed. And no, it didn't come out of nowhere. There were signs, but I was blinded by the honeymoon phase. The next day, I remembered to stop sharing my location. Almost instantly, she started messaging me in rage. Every message she sent made me more certain I had made the right choice. My final message to her was, "I'm sorry, Emily. I need to block you for a while. You're scaring me." She didn't show up again, but I noticed she stopped sharing her location right away. Exactly 1 week later, I went to Phil's again. I left around 11 p.m. When I got home, I wasn't tired, and I was hungry. I heated up some food, sat on the couch, and browsed streaming apps for a scary movie. When the microwave beeped and everything went silent, I suddenly heard a click or thud from the dining room. The layout of my townhouse looped around in a circle. Kitchen, dining room, living room, den, separated by a central wall. But the dining room had a closed door instead of an open arch. I muted the TV and listened. That's when I clearly heard the door between the den and dining room creak open. I looked and called out, "Who's there?" No reply. I walked in. My blood ran cold when I saw that door wide open. I always keep all doors in the house shut, especially that one. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife, and immediately called 911. It was my first time ever calling emergency services. I spoke loudly into the phone so whoever was in the house would hear me say, "I think my crazy ex-girlfriend broke into my house. Please send someone." I explained what was happening. The dispatcher told me to leave the house if I could. I waited outside near the door. To my surprise, the cops showed up quickly. I explained everything and led the officer into the house. We did a thorough search together. No one was there. We checked everything: under the beds, closets, couch, crawl space, attic. The officer told me to call again if I heard anything. He believed me. I wasn't imagining it. There was no way I could relax after that. I ate my food, went upstairs, locked my door, and texted everyone I knew. I tried to write it off as some creepy coincidence. I almost texted Emily, but I didn't. I took a melatonin and surprisingly fell asleep quickly. But I'm a light sleeper, and something woke me up. The room felt wrong. I checked my phone and saw tons of text from a random number. That must have been what woke me. It didn't take long to realize it was Emily. A long paragraph apologizing, begging to talk, saying she wanted to see me. The rest of the texts were her writing. "Are you awake? Wake up. Wake up." She said it 8 times. Oddly, she hadn't called me. I replied, "Why are you awake right now? This is insane. You blowing up my phone at this hour is proof enough that I want nothing to do with you anymore. Please leave me alone." Seconds after I send, I heard a scream from my closet. Emily's voice. "No!" The closet door burst open. I didn't think. I just jumped out of bed and ran. The bedroom door wasn't locked anymore. I got out, slammed the door shut behind me, and held it. She didn't just try to open it. She started stabbing the door. I saw the knife piercing through right where my side had been moments before. In that instant, I yelled, "Baby, I love you. Stop." Instead of saying she was crazy, I improvised. I told her I was going through a hard time, but I loved her and wanted to get back together. She paused, then said, frantic, "That's all I wanted to hear. Why couldn't you just be honest?" She asked me to open the door. I stalled, told her I was scared, asked her to drop the knife. She agreed. I told her to throw it across the room. I wanted to hear it hit the floor. She did. I heard it clang off the wall and fall. That's when I ripped the door open and tackled her to the floor. She screamed, fought back, went hysterical. I didn't care. I pinned her down and yelled my address into the phone, still connected to 911. To my shock, the police kicked in the front door, loud enough to echo upstairs. A lot of officers came in. Emily was cuffed, crying uncontrollably. I wasn't crying. I was in pure shock. It was the most traumatic night of my life, and the nightmare didn't end there. There was a long, painful legal process. Emily was convicted on serious charges. She's now in prison. That doesn't bring me joy. This was someone I shared my life with, someone I thought I loved, someone who tried to kill me. She was deeply unwell, and what hurts most is how oblivious I was. Not just because I was infatuated, but because of my own lack of self-confidence. I was too busy trying to impress her to notice the red flags. I know this will haunt me forever, and honestly, even anonymously, it feels good to finally share this story. If someone chooses to read it, maybe it'll serve as a warning.